work out how to get the hot water to it.
Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield, and I'm the chair of this committee. Before we start the meeting, I just have a few housekeeping announcements to make, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I could quote them by heart, but there are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is the St John's Churchyard of Druid Street. Council security staff are available to direct you. The public toilets are located on the main reception area. Please switch your mobile phone to silent whilst in the meeting. Code for the Wi-Fi is on the wall somewhere. You read it. The meeting is being live streamed to the Southwark Council YouTube channel via the Zoom platform. A recording of the meeting will also be viewable on YouTube after the meeting has finished. May I remind members to raise your hand if you wish to speak, and please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing. In the interest of health and safety, please remember to wear mask face covering when moving around the building unless exempt. You may take them off whilst seated. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. So let's move on with the agenda proper. First, apologies. I have received apologies from Councillor King, Councillor Victoria Lisa, and Marsan, isn't it? Marcy. Sorry? Marcy, yeah, the co-operative member, yeah. Do we have any more apologies this evening at all? No, thank you very much. Okay, so let's just whip round the room in terms of voting membership. I've already introduced myself. Councillor Check.
Evening, I'm Councillor Victor Chamberlain, Liberal Democrat member for Bankside and Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ali.
Councillor Hamera Ali, London Bridge and Westburn, Liberal Democrat.
Very much. Councillor Voodoo.
Councillor Peter Voodoo, Labour member for Rye.
Thank you. Councillor Buck.
Chair, Councillor Buck, Labour member for Barleywood.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Councillor Gaffney was Labour member for Nottingham Queenswell.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Paul. Okay, all right. You don't have to give your CV. Okay. Councillor Newman.
Councillor Margaret Ewan is Labour member for Southwark.
And we're also delighted to have Martin Brecknell here.
Martin Brecknell, representing the Anglican Diocese.
Thank you very much. Welcome. I just wanted to say, before we get into the rest of the agenda, I just want to say that it's already been commented on before we started the meeting, but there are 5 members of the committee who won't be standing at the elections. That's Councillor Ali, Councillor Babudu, Councillor Buck, Councillor Lisa, who's not here, and Councillor Bernard. And I just wanted to thank you all for your contributions over the last 4 years on this committee. It's been very entertaining and productive and constructive, if I could use those adjectives. But no, seriously, you've all made tremendous contributions. I've appreciated it, even if it's not been obvious enough. But we've had some very lively and interesting discussions, and you answered very pertinent questions of cabinet members and others that we've had here for interview. So thank you all once again for that contribution. I wish you well. Item 2, notification of any items of business which deems urgent. I have no items other than to say, besides the main agenda, you should have 2 supplementals. Supplemental number 1 with the minutes, and supplemental 2 in relation to the climate strategy and action plan. Okay. And there are other papers which have been circulated. We have Appendix 1, the Borough Plan Interim Performance 2018, 19, 21, 22. You should have had the spare copies over here if you haven't got them. And we've also had so far we've had two sets of recommendations for the generation report circulated. Is there a third set to come?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. Will they be printed or? Okay, thank you very much. Right, so let's move on to item 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Are there any interest or dispensations that any member wishes to disclose? No? Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 4, the minutes. Can we agree as a true record the minutes for the meeting held on the 21st of February this year? Agreed. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to item 5, which is the climate strategy and action plan. I'm very pleased to say that we have Councillor Helen Dennis here this evening, Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency and Sustainable Development. And we've also got Tom Harland here, the Climate Change Programme Lead. So you're both welcome. Would you like to come to the table, please? As members will be aware, the proposed Cabinet response to the Scrutiny recommendations were circulated with the agenda on Monday evening. I was wondering, Councillor Dennis, if you wanted to just quickly refer to that before we open up to questions.
Yeah,
Would that be okay?
absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair. So as you just kind of alluded to, timings haven't quite matched up, but we have essentially the report which is going to Cabinet next month, which next week, even, sorry, it was published on Monday. Obviously, Cabinet can still make amendments to that, but I don't think the thrust of it will change. So broadly in that report, you'll see that we very much, we welcomed the recommendations from OSC. A lot of this was in line with what we were already planning to do in terms of the review of the strategy and action plan. So the report sets out in a bit more detail how we're planning to smarten up the targets, but also the timing of the review. I think I mistakenly said September was originally the intention in the last meeting. But July, I think, is always the intention in terms of bringing forward the review of the strategy and action plan. That's 1 year on from the agreement of the action plan last year. So that is still on course, and Tom can outline some of the work that they're already doing as officers to prepare for that review. I think the timing of that is still the right timing, and it's the best use of council resources, because that enables us to take account of recommendations from the Citizens Jury, which is publishing its report this week, and also to take account of any future commitments in a borough plan after May. So there is, I think, a rationale there to waiting to thoroughly review the strategy and action plan at that point in time, but obviously incorporating the suggestions that OSC made, as I said, which are things we were wanting to do anyway, but I think it's helpful for those to be underlined. Some of the other recommendations that OSC made, again, were very much in line with things that we are already doing. So as you know, in the climate strategy and action plan, we already outlined a number of key council policies that we would be seeking to align with the climate strategy and action plan. A number of those will be under review this year, including the movement plan, which is obviously fundamental to our objectives around active travel and decarbonisation of transport. Also the air quality action plan as well. I mentioned a couple of others in here. So there's very much kind of work ongoing to ensure that everything is in sync. And then also there was a recommendation around training for members following the local elections. And that's something that I know officers are going to be offering and working on. So again, all of those recommendations are broadly accepted. And if of interest, Tom can probably outline some of the work officers have been doing over the last few months to prepare for that review.
Can I just check the Citizens Jury's meeting tomorrow evening? Is it not?
So yes, so there's 2 meetings over the next couple of weeks. So tomorrow we have a launch that is bringing together members of the Citizens Jury with councillors, with other stakeholders, other partners, people who are involved in the oversight panel. So a lot of the people who are required to implement the recommendations and to get buy-in, not just across the council, but other organisations that have got the power to implement, kind of cuts to emissions. And then there'll be a further event next Thursday, the 10th, which any member of the public in Southwark, any residents can sign up to and come along to and ask their questions and hear from the jury as well. And that's being publicised on social media and through newsletters in a different way. So in the same way that the summit, the climate conference, for example, was publicised. So so anyone can join in with that. So we've got those two events.
And they can sign in through the website.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tom, did you want to add anything to this?
It's helpful to add a bit more about what we've been doing around the actions. So we published the actions for the first time in July last year. Since that point, as a member of the climate change team, it's been trying to establish ownership of those actions. Obviously, you've seen the actions, they cut across a huge amount of what the council does. So we've set up a governance structure internally that's at the lowest level as an officer group, who are the sort of day-to-day officers who are delivering against these actions, to a directors group and also a chief officer oversight group as well, because it was key for us to establish ownership. So yes, we publish the actions, but alongside that, we track owner, we track other teams who aren't directly leading but may want to contribute, the status of the action, the key milestones that are coming up. We track risk status in terms of time, resource, and funding that's available. So a lot of the smart actions that you've identified in this report talks about were in process of being done, and we'll be strengthening those over the next couple of months. And then as part of updating the actions, publishing those again in the summer, we'll share that detail at that point. So as Councillor Dennis said, it's very much been a work in progress really since we published last summer. And we'll continue to do that.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Ali.
Yeah, just two things from me. So firstly, the meeting tomorrow is directly after the North West Forum, and we're in person for that, but the other one's on Zoom. And I have a feeling that's going to overrun. So there's a bit of a challenge around councillors being able to show up on time. It's going to be common.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that. I mean, obviously, I'm one of the councillors who's affected by that, and so we moved the timing of that citizens' jury event, which was originally proposed for 6:30 to 7:30. The hope, obviously, is that that's a decision-making meeting, and we'll be able to run through those decisions in time. But yes, there's a logistical challenge there. Thursdays were just chosen because that's when the jury has been meeting, and so it was the best time in terms of jury members' availability. So apologies that we haven't been able. It's not ideal.
I'm just assuming though that someone has informed whoever's chairing that meeting. So I don't know if I guess it's one of our teams who's chairing it, but that actually need to desk off so that we can set up laptops.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that.
Thank you. Then the other piece is, going through our recommendations, there's a common theme there that says we just unsighted on the overall plan as opposed to the strategy. So I guess a question for you, Tom, and really good to hear about the governance structure being set up. What I feel will be helpful for future committees is actually just to see almost a project plan it could be a plan for a plan. So here's when we will start to produce those smart metrics, or here's when we might be starting to move to the next phase or whatever else. And that might save them an awful lot of time and effort making recommendations that we're already thinking about, if that helps.
Yes.
So is it possible to potentially share that overarching, I don't want to just say represent it as a Gantt chart, but some form of plan that kind of gives us a sense of when you start to implement some of the governance.
Absolutely, we're going through that process at the moment. So we'll be able to set up the key timelines. It's really essential for us as a team. We're speaking to colleagues. We're not simply rewording actions on behalf of other colleagues. So we're ensuring we have those meetings, talking to people. The focus of that is really going to be over the next couple of months. But I'd be happy to share our kind of our top level timeline in terms of moving towards July, how we pull that together.
Absolutely. Thank you. And the governance structure around that.
Yeah.
Councillor Buck.
Yeah, just a couple of things for me. With the review, so this is to be published by July 2021. Can you give us a concrete assurance that it will be completed in time for that? Because I'm just kind of conscious of the election, the introduction of the council plan, councillor and officer time is going to be busy, but these reviews are important. They happen on time. So can you give us a concrete assurance that it will be done on time? And sticking to projects being done on time, within the responses given in the report, we have a lot of very major council documents that are going to be reviewed and brought up to speed Obviously, the most important thing with this climate strategy is the ticking clock that we're running against. And my experience of trying to get policy change through departments in this council has been that it takes a very long time. Can you please give us some kind of assurance on how long those reviews are going to take, so that this committee or the subsequent one that comes in after the election can hold you to account over those times? And I think a general steer is important. And one final thing, with the training for new councillors, will external experts be feeding into those? Because I'm very conscious that climate is not the natural realm of council officers, and council officers themselves are learning about this process. And I think it's really important that we're leaning on the expertise in the field that does exist. So not just council officers doing that training, but will external experts be brought in for it as well? That's my take.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, in terms of the actual timing of the review and bringing it to July, you've asked for a clarifying guarantee. All I can say is it's absolute priority and something that we've been having lots of discussion about to ensure that it is delivered on time, which is why I know that officers are using the next couple of months to do a lot of the technical work that needs to be done. As you said, there will then be a kind of regrouping post May, as it were, and it's why July rather than June, I think, is the best. It's feasible. June will look too tight, but I know that that the officers have been doing their kind of project planning around it to ensure that we meet those deadlines. On the other plans, I mean, there's they range in process and scope, I would say. So some of them, so they will be started this year. But if you take something like the climate review of the Southwark plan, that has to go through, obviously, a kind of formal process where it goes to the planning inspector and there's an examination in public, etc. So that's obviously a longer process. And if we were just doing an internal review, that doesn't have to be reviewed externally. But of course, the ones that I've cited here are ones that are timetabled here to do this year and where there are resources allocated to take that work.
So is that to be completed this year, started this year?
Which one?
Well, I mean, I think there was 3 that were mentioned. It was or 4. There was the Southwark plan, the movement plan, air quality, and was there one more, or was that?
I think I've also mentioned the procurement framework as well. So they're all to be started this year. I think some of those could be completed. I think that the procurement framework is due to be completed, but I need to double check on that for
Would
you.
it be okay if you could write to the committee?
Yeah, I can do that.
With some timelines for the new committee to talk to you about in the future.
Yeah.
Well, and just external experts for the members' training.
I've had a conversation with a colleague on Monday about that. They're looking into a couple of options at the moment, both external, recognising that again, there is, as you say, that external knowledge to bring in. They're just exploring cost options. Just to add on the policy position. So our officer group meets quarterly. We recognise as a team that we need to be speaking to colleagues across the council a lot more frequently. So an example of planning policy, we meet them every 2 weeks, just so we're ensuring the workflows are aligned. We do the same with the local economy team. We're currently reviewing the strategy 2027, so we're trying to build in that review policy within our day-to-day work.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Newton, next.
Thank you. You've actually, so thank you very much to all the amazing work that's gone into this. I think that, I think probably most people feel very happy with this. When we last looked at it, and that's the real sort of, what you're saying, that's fantastic. I was going to ask a question very sort of closely linked to what you just said. It's one thing we're talking about training for councillors who are going to be elected, but I suppose something which comes into the that I feel often is that perhaps obviously we've got huge numbers of staff who equally are perhaps they are of course going to be extremely good at their own job, but we're asking people to suddenly look at everything through this particular lens, and there will be lots of members of staff equally who are not necessarily up to speed as well. So can we also ensure, and how will we ensure, and what provisions will be made to ensure that staff also are going to be
involved in that training process?
I mean, I'll mention just that in the response on paragraph 24, we do also talk about guidance to officers and training to officers that hopefully will be offered later in the year as well. So again, I don't know if someone wants to elaborate on that. We do recognise that training to officers as well as training to members is really essential, particularly in implementing the constitutional amendment.
I think a really positive change. So I've been in the council for about a year. In that time, I'm sure that we've introduced for every decision the report has to have climate change concurrence. So that's been a huge difference in our team seeing decisions that cut across everything we do as a council. We've provided initial guidance to officers on the sorts of things they need to be looking at. So it's a great way for us to point them towards the strategy so they're aware of the strategy and referencing key points. I think the next step is, as you say, offering a bit more training on how that can become more detailed, how we can do things in specific carbon savings, and that's what we're conscious of. So it's been a good first step, but yeah, we're conscious that more support is coming.
Okay, I've got Councillor Edwards, please. Yeah, to be fair, I think Margie's question is pretty similar to what I was going to ask, so please don't go into any detail. So I'll ask it just a slightly more general way, which is that it seems to me that this, as you say, this is so cross-cutting, this is such a huge thing for the council, such a massive priority. Are you confident that with the training and the staff communications and the other measures that you've put in place, that we're going to have the culture shift in the council that is going to be needed to get everybody thinking about tackling the climate emergency as you know, a core part of their own job? Because it's nobody's fault that maybe we're not in that place right now, but clearly that's an important part of the culture shift that needs to happen. So are we confident that that culture shift is going to happen? Because ultimately that is going to be the bedrock of what will be hopefully a successful strategy.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly the ambition is certainly the cumulative impact of all the things that we're putting in place, whether that's the constitutional amendment, which is a kind of key driver of change, then plus all of the kind of institutional arrangements, like across the organisation that Tom spoke about, bringing together key officers at different levels, like across the organisation. Also a very strong kind of staff network on climate as well. But I think that cumulatively, and we're talking about the climate emergency as one of the council's kind of top priorities. I think we've got Councillor Williams coming later. He's been really keen to stress that kind of tackling inequalities, strong local economy post-pandemic, things tackling the climate emergency are fundamental to everything that the council is trying to do. So, I think that message is getting through.
Yeah, I've been in the year that I've been here, really positive conversations with colleagues. When I started, I expected more conversations. So I found that really refreshing across all teams, that colleagues really want to get involved and they want to do positive work. Challenges around resource obviously remain. So that's been very positive. I think from a technical point of view, it's ensuring that these actions are owned by those individuals, but also at a director level. So as part of the smart review, we want to link our actions to named directors, so that there is that ownership and those actions aren't just something that sits in a strategy, but they actually work plans across the council, and then that's supported with the training that we're talking about. So as Councillor Denton, I think we made really positive steps, but yeah, it's working. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Alan, when the council published the climate action plan, it was slammed by 18 community groups for failing to have these smart targets. And that's why when we met as a committee in January, we listened to what XR had to say and we made the recommendation about having smart targets. So that was really positive step forward. Well, we did actually ask for it to be done before the local elections, if you remember, which we failed to do. We actually asked for targets to be set, that were smart, that we could challenge them. And unfortunately, the budget didn't have those smart targets in it. It failed to actually show how the budget was going to make that tangible difference, a positive difference to tackling the climate emergency when we asked for it. Despite it being told that it was there, it was able to be shared, we got nothing as a committee about what positive impact this year's budget had on tackling the climate emergency. Even in this report, which I do welcome, and I do think is a really positive step forward, we're still not getting smart targets about when you're planning to do the reviews on council policies or what that means in reality. So I suppose coming off that, I think I've got two questions. One is, how are we going to be working with the third sector, with communities? You mentioned some of that already in your introduction, but how are we going to make sure that the next iteration of our climate action plan is not slammed by community groups and is fit for purpose? And secondly, of the reviews that you're planning to do of the council policies, could you highlight what you think the top priorities are in your eyes for each of them in terms of tackling the climate emergency? I'm particularly interested in the air quality.
I think, I'm obviously going to disagree a bit with your analysis, Councillor Chamberlain, because I think that the action plan now has been assessed independently and been given a very positive review and rated as the second best action plan in London. And we're really proud of that in terms of the work that the council officers did in particular, all of the work that went into baselining, looking at those trajectories, detailed technical work that goes alongside the strategy and action plan. The criticisms that came forward on the strategy and action plan from some external organisations were quite specific around, as you say, the kind of process or the targets rather than the actual content, actually. The content that is in the action plan across a whole range of areas supports the consultation that we did extensively, even in difficult circumstances during a pandemic. And what is quite interesting as well, and obviously people will see it tomorrow, is that the citizen jury report, I think, also resonates very strongly and echoes lots of the similar themes which are already in our strategy and action plan. So I think the content broadly is really sound. And on this kind of continued line that there aren't smart targets at the moment, I would remind people that we do have the borough plan, that we have targets which are smart around doubling cycle storage, around cycle highways, around 10,000, planting 10,000 new trees by this year. There's actually quite a lot of smart targets and content which is in the borough plan and pulled over into the climate strategy and action plan. We want to get to that point across a whole range of areas where we are smartening things up, but there is a lot of accountability already there within the borough plan process on a lot of these issues. In terms of, what was your second question was about priorities?
One was about engaging. That was just explaining the context, thanks. But one was about actually understanding how we're going to engage with community groups and residents to make sure that the next plan is fit for purpose. And the second question was, what are your top priorities for all the council policies that you highlighted in the paper in terms of tackling the climate emergency?
So in terms of community engagement, obviously, so the citizen jury was a really important part of this process for us, because it was actually about engaging with a wide representative group across the borough and trying to get a sense of how people feel about the climate emergency and things that people want to prioritise. So that's been really, that is really fundamental, and we want to build on that as much as possible to try and, where people want to stay engaged with processes, who are involved in the citizen jury, enable them and support them to do that, but also look going forward at how we can work to broaden out the engagement on the climate emergency and reach people, residents, for example, who haven't been engaged to date. So we're looking at how we do that, but a lot of that's about kind of tapping into kind of other networks and organisations across the borough who we hope we can then kind of galvanise and bring on board. So we're working through those plans at the moment, more specifically, so we should be able to kind of provide more detail soon on the arrangements for that going forward. I think also I've got a real desire to kind of think about, really how we localise this across the borough. So thinking about kind of neighbourhood plans on climate, or even or statewide plans, for example, that can be brought forward. So that's something that I think could help bring it to life for people, and something that I'm keen to work with departments on going forward. And then so it was on priorities for climate going forward. I mean, there's obviously a huge amount in the action plan. Some of the priorities are aligned to some of the funding announcements that we made at Council Assembly as well. Clearly there is the biggest kind of win, if you like, is around decarbonisation of buildings, because that is the area which is highlighted first and foremost as the contributor to all of our emissions across the borough, and getting progress on alternatives to fossil fuel heating systems on our estates, in council buildings, supporting the kind of widespread adoption of alternatives to fossil fuels across the borough has got to be a kind of number one priority. It's also, you know, the most kind of underfunded and tricky area in some ways, but that's, I think, is an important area. And obviously in terms of our work on estates, one of the things I did highlight at Council Assembly was the £7 million heat pump project working across 3 of our estates at the moment, which will be completed this year, and very much hope to build on that going forward. In terms, you mentioned air quality, and obviously our work on transport and active travel more generally, I think is a really key priority. So looking at how we can build on the success of school streets, how we can learn and build on the low traffic neighbourhoods work, how we can improve greening as well in relation to that work. Is the air quality action plan is something that Councillor Rose will be leading on, but obviously there's lots of different elements to that, and that has not just carbon benefits, but obviously kind of wider environmental and public health benefits to it as well. So that's obviously really important. And as I said, transport and buildings are kind of two areas, I think, which kind of come out in the action plan. And the third one really is actually more about the community engagement and participation, because I think we've been really clear that we can only tackle the climate emergency if we do it together. The council can play its part, but this has got to be about building a movement for change, and taking our residents with us. So I would say that that is the kind of third priority, is getting that community engagement and participation piece right over the coming year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Councillor Werner.
Yeah, thank you. And, I think you asked quite a lot of the questions I wanted to. I just wanted to say I think it's looking pretty good, and I think we've come on kind of leaps and bounds since I started chairing the Environment Commission before we even had a climate strategy. No one was really, when I first started as a councillor in 2018, no one was really talking about it that much. But everyone is talking about it. Every single councillor in this room is really on board with it, and I think that's so positive. And we need this kind of movement, and we need to move faster. And I just wanted to congratulate you on the strategy and being kind of second in London. That is excellent. I guess my kind of questions, and I really like the stuff you said about working at a ward level, because I've very much been encouraging that in South Bermondsey. We set up a green group with organisations in the ward and on the estates. I'm working to set up gardening clubs across the ward as well, and it really works well. And we created a green action plan for South Bermondsey. So I think it's really good way to engage with the local community schools, bringing everyone together. I think it's creating that kind of collaborative approach across each ward. What I wanted to ask was about the citizens' juries. So there's a meeting tomorrow. What happens after? I think you briefly mentioned it, but you can ask about that. So what happens next? And I guess, what do you think the biggest obstacle is going forward? Obviously, funding. If we want to retrofit all the homes in Southwark, it's going to cost a lot. And as we've seen from previous scrutiny commissions, there's not we don't have the skills. There are not enough people who work in that area. So I guess, yeah, I'd like to know kind of what you think the biggest obstacles are and how we will tackle those going forward.
So in terms of what happens next on the citizen jury, the kind of technical process, if you like, is that there's an initial report going to Cabinet next week. That's not the full council response because we won't have time to turn that around, but it is our initial response. And then post-election, there will be a fuller response, which brings together, the recommendations from the jury are pretty detailed, so it will require departments across the council to look at those and consider those and look at resources available and provide a full response. And so that will be published alongside our action plan update in July, so that everything is kind of feeding into that same process, so that we can clearly respond to the citizen jury at the same time as we're updating the strategy and action plan. In terms of what actually happens to the jury members going forward and themselves, I don't know if that's kind of quite a question, but there's been a huge amount of kind of support that's provided alongside to support their involvement and participation in the process. So we were really clear when we did the recruitment that it's a discrete process, and there's no commitments kind of after the report is published from the juries. But those who do want to stay engaged with the council, we're kind of actively looking at ways in which we could encourage them and facilitate their participation going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and maybe connecting it with CGS, and if people are really enthusiastic and want to do stuff in their communities, providing them with the right tools and the money. So it might be a way to kind of combine CGS and the work of citizen juries, so that they can go out and do positive action in the community. And I guess the other question is that obstacles.
I mean, I think you've probably identified those in your question. So we have the initial estimate through the strategy and action plan, £3.92 billion is required in capital funding. A lot of that is around retrofit of council housing. So that's the biggest challenge. And also you mentioned workforce challenges as well. We are trying to look at how we address these challenges. So on the workforce, for example, it's just been announced that across Southwark, Lambeth, Lewisham, working with LSBU, we're setting up a Green Skills Academy, so that will support workforce training and development. So that's one initiative that the council is taking to try and address that challenge. But yes, they remain really significant challenges.
Thanks for the work you've done.
Thank you. Councillor Booden,
my question was covered. I reiterate, it's a fantastic thing that we're on. And it feels hugely important, but recognise and things like citizen juries might do the same thing happening, but that nature of community involvement, I hope we find a way to maintain some kind of number of that.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Dennis and Tom, for coming this evening and giving a full reply to questions, and wish you well with your plan. And no doubt those that are remaining, we'll see you again in the future at another meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Okay, let's move on to item 6 with the interview with the leader of the council. Would you like to come up, please, Councillor Williams? Welcome, Councillor Williams, to the meeting. We've looked at particular areas which we'd like you to comment on, specifically just giving a sort of end-of-year review of the council services, a sort of projection of going forward from this point, and just a summary really of the council's themed performance over the last 4 years in this term, and any lessons that can be drawn from what's happened during that period. You've kindly furnished us with a copy of the borough plan, which members have before them, which is due to be considered by Cabinet next week. So if you'd like to just give your introduction, and then we'll follow with questions, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me along. I think it's important to say, looking back over the last 4 years, it's really been an incredibly difficult 4 years on many, many levels. And whether that's the amount of funding we've lost at the council, the government cutting back on our funding, or most obviously the pandemic. And I suppose I want to start by saying a huge thank you. And that's thank you to all the council staff, all of our partner organisations, whether it be the NHS or the voluntary sector, and indeed to all of our councillors for the work that we've done to step up during that period and support our residents. I certainly really encourage people to read the Borough Plan Performance Report that is going to Cabinet this week, which sets out a lot of detail on the things we've been doing. But it's an incredible amount, and I think it's incredible on both in a normal 4 years, but indeed on top of that, there's all of the COVID response. And I want to say a little bit about the ongoing response to COVID, where we've gone overall, and then where we go next. It's an important thing to cover. In terms of our response to COVID, I can hand on heart say it's been second to none in the country. We've worked incredibly hard, and whether it's the vaccination programme support that we provided as a council, making sure that we've literally been out knocking on people's doors to make sure those who are least likely to take up the vaccine take it up, making sure we have support everywhere we need, setting up test and trace, making sure all of our care homes have PPE, getting over £250 million out to support businesses and protect local jobs, supporting 70,000 plus people through our Community Support Alliance work collectively between the council and the voluntary sector, the NHS and others. We've really been there for our residents throughout the whole period, and that work continues today. And whilst clearly we're in a period where now we are thankfully for people returning to a much more normal life, and that's really important for people's jobs and incomes and mental health and well-being. But of course, we are still working to make sure that the booster, for example, is taken up by people locally. So that has been an incredible effort. Again, sits on top of everything we would normally do day to day as a council. At the same time, we continue to do remarkable things delivering for our residents, and I do think they are truly remarkable given everything that's happened with the pandemic. The fact that we are on track to have got to a point where we've got 2,500 council homes built or on site, being built on site, despite the fact the construction industry shut down for getting on for a year, despite the fact there have been incredible shortages in materials and many other things. A real, genuine, and incredible achievement. The fact that we as a borough have supported more people into apprenticeships than any other London borough over the last few years, and we continue to do that during the pandemic, is a genuinely amazing achievement. The fact that we pressed on with improving social care just earlier this month, we agreed our ethical care charter for residential care. So ethical care charter, the old one, residential care charter, but now the new one, setting out fair pay, a real much stronger voice for families and people in care of their own care, a whole package of things that will drive up care. We've done that again during a period when there was such change and so much pressure on our care homes. I'm delighted that our schools are rated now 95% good or outstanding, and working very hard with them to help them catch up, help the children and young people in those schools catch up, including by rolling out mental health support, which we know is in incredibly high need for young people in our borough, particularly, always has been the case across nationally, and it is a scandal that nationally for young people access to mental health support is incredibly difficult, and they're waiting years. It's unimaginable when you're a 10, 11-year-old, just a timeline you don't operate on. But we're setting up a process where we've got open access mental health support in our borough, and that support being rolled out to schools across the east as well. And then I probably won't say too much about it because Helen's just been talking about it, but we've also made real improvements on our environment as well. And I think the 39 there, school streets rolled out, the traffic neighbourhoods we've rolled out, the work we've done in installing 17 kilometres of cycle lanes, the road crossings we've installed, the work we've done installing heat pumps on our estates, so thousands of homes. These things we've moved on and made progress on in the context of so much else happening in people's lives. So there's so much more I could celebrate, and I'm big hope we'll come back to lots of questions, but I want to leave time for you to ask those questions. And I want to finish where I started, which is by saying a real heartfelt thank you to everyone who's helped deliver that, and in particular, a thank you to all of our staff at all levels, from those who've kept emptying our bins and cleaning our streets throughout the whole pandemic, through to those that have been making sure we have a fantastic public health response, to those that have been making sure we're on site building council homes that our residents need.
Absolutely, we echo those remarks and those answering members' inquiries as well.
Indeed.
Okay, so I've got council back.
Thanks, Kieran. So I've got kind of one more specific question and then a more general one, but they're kind of on the same theme, and that's on strategic issues and how the council can respond in areas where perhaps other layers of government are letting our residents down. So the specific issue is one I'm very passionate about, which is about transport, and how it's certainly my view that we have quite a challenging relationship with the government and the GLA at the moment, with unaligned priorities, that is leaving the borough in quite a difficult position moving forward. So my question is, how do you think we can respond as a council to deliver transport infrastructure that we need within the funding and infrastructure packets that we do have available? So not a blue sky, not if something changes, not if people give us more money, etc. But what we have, how do you think we can deliver that transport infrastructure that we know the borough needs within our own scope? And a more general question, once you've kind of responded to that one, is what other opportunities do you see for the council to directly deliver where areas are where the government are letting residents down, just in a general sense? Because I think we're getting into that position where we're having to do more and more on our own steam, perhaps, than we have in previous years. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to take them one at a time? Shall I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, I mean, I completely agree on the question. I suppose the base of your question about transport. We're in a situation where London has arguably one of the best transport systems in the world. That system has been hit incredibly hard by the pandemic because, unlike almost any other major city, it is predominantly based on fares and taxation, with minimal tax raising powers. And that has led to a point where, in the short term, there's a huge funding gap to TfL. We all know this, and the government is refusing to step in and provide just a sensible settlement to carry on supporting what is that will be public transport service. And that, of course, has created huge problems for the day-to-day services, but creates an even bigger problem when you're trying to fund major transport projects, which take years to deliver and need financial certainty to know how you're going to get there, which you do. I suppose my answer to the main question now, though, is in two parts. I think it's absolutely beholden on all of us to continue to be clear about the long-term ambition for the big, major investment that we need in public transport to make our city a low-carbon, great place to live, sustainable city. And none of us should ever lose sight of the need for that. And some of that investment will take years and decades to come through, as has always been the case with major transport infrastructure. We must never lower ambitions on those things. But of course, we need to get on and do things in the here and now, and that's absolutely right. I think it's really important to remember that in our borough, the vast majority of the journeys are by people walking, catching the bus, and to a growing degree, but lesser degree, cycling. And they're things where we can, as a council, make a major change. We need to make our borough a borough where walking is a great experience for everyone. And we continue to do that, and whether that's about the routes through our parks, or making our neighbourhoods safe places to walk, improving that walking infrastructure and experience. And we can continue doing that with the budgets we've got and the work we do. On bus services, we clearly need to keep the pressure up to maintain investment in those services so we continue to have quality bus services across the borough. But we can also work to make sure those bus services work as well as they possibly can for people, and looking at how we can make sure that we reduce the things that delay buses across our piece. I think there are bits of work that we can very actively do that will genuinely improve transport for our residents. I think beyond the sort of for buses beyond that, there is a real opportunity to then look at, well, actually, what is a radically better bus service at the costs that we can afford to look like, and that takes you down the route of rapid bus transit, things that look and feel like trains, maybe transit. But that's a thing that we can explore. All of those things need really clear cost basis for them, and we should look at them in the round. That's really important for us, I think, to look at those options. And the last thing I'd say on the transport bit, obviously, is cycling. We've seen many people cycling in the borough in recent years. That's a fantastic achievement. We need to get many more cycling. I'm delighted that we're extending cycle hire further, using some of the investment that comes in development to fund that. We've doubled the number of cycle hangers, so people don't have somewhere to store a bike in their own house. More do. We need to continue to do more of that. as well as segregated cycle routes, etc. So there's lots we can do that will improve the things that actually are the main mode of transport for most people in our borough. But ultimately, on top of that, we do need the long-term investment in the bigger infrastructure as well, to lose sight of that. And on the things that we can do, councils can do more of. I mean, I suppose I could give you a long list of things that I would say actually where local government could do much better than national government is currently doing. The challenge is having the resources to do it. I'm going to give you a good example: employment support, helping people back into work at the moment. The government is notoriously bad at it. They commission programs, don't really work, and they finally get them to almost working in a scrap, and they commission another program that doesn't really work, and we go around in circles. We've got Southwark Works in the borough that we've invested in the council. It's embedded, it works really well. We could scale that up even more if we had the resource from government to do so. So there are areas like that where I would like us to be able to step in and say, the government actually stop doing things that don't really work very well for our residents, give us the resource to do them. But beyond that, I think the shift to a low carbon borough absolutely has to be done, very much of it at a local level, because it's fine to say we need to retrofit homes, and it's fine to say we need to help people to shift their cars. And there clearly is a government role in those things. But ultimately, we've got to make that work on a local context and that local level and on the street. So stepping into that space, I think, is something that we will be doing more of as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ali, please.
Hi, I've got 3 questions. Sorry. So the first, and they're on 3 slightly different things. So the first question is, how accessible do you think the council is to residents' business? And I guess I'm thinking about it in more sort of traditional sense about customer service model and accessibility, and how are we measuring this? So are you happy with it, or views on that? Second thing is, pandemic has really changed so much. And obviously there was, and I appreciate, you've been sort of in post for 2 years now, and there was a plan adjustment as you came on board. But with all of the changes, are there sort of areas of focus where you think we're going to have to think really differently as we start to come out of the heat of the pandemic? And the last thing is that over the last term, appreciating the qualification of being leader for 2 of the 4 years, is there anything that we weren't able to deliver as a council that you feel like we wish we could have? I mean, I appreciate there's constraints, pandemic and everything as a reason why it wasn't.
Thank you. So in terms of being an accessible organisation, having good quality service, really appreciate the first question. But I mean, I think we should always push to be better at these things. Hard when you're having money taken away from you, and that's a real challenge. And I think if I look across the council, there are some things. A good example: our resident services are so much more accessible than when any of us are looking in listening to people at housing associations who can't get hold of residents officer of any kind. So I think there are areas where we've got real strengths that we should be proud of and build on. And it clearly has been a challenge to maintain some of that during COVID. The bits of our service that you could just walk into, at times we've had to not have operating in that way, and that's been a challenge in itself. And of course, there's also been a challenge of just staffing levels and other things that we've seen periods where people are self-isolating and not in the office, etc. So, I think there is definitely always more we can do. I do think on the flip side of everything, of the challenges that for COVID, actually we've learned some things that work very well. Take another practical example. Prior to COVID, where we have families who were already in temporary accommodation, we were asking them to come into the office quite often to see their housing advisor. Actually, we've managed to pilot and work quite well a process where they can dial in to make that call when it suits them from their home, not trek over to Peckham if they're somewhere else. And that's worked really well. I think we can learn lessons from that from other services. We must, and in our customer access strategy, we are really clear in terms of being accessible. We want to be a council where everyone has access. So we're never going to be a digital only council where you're a vulnerable old resident, you can't get anything. We're going to be a council that's got a range of different ways to get in. We do want to make the best of technology to mean that those who can access it in a way that's convenient for them and efficient for everyone, minimises the amount of council taxpayer money we have to spend on that, whilst providing access for residents who are accessible. So, yeah, I think we do a good job, but there's always room for improvement, and I want to look at how we can make those improvements. Things that need to be different coming out of the pandemic.
It's not a strategic thing, so
Yeah.
examples might be, I appreciate the whole plan, some of the plan thing is a bit like lengthy, whatever, but previous things were like, let's just have office blocks all over the place. Some of those big strategic things. What do you think are the primary areas that are actually going to change, which do you think will actually not change?
I carry everything I say here with you. It's very uncertain times. I think it's a good thing to say. So things like how much people are going to want office accommodation. You get lots of mixed messages about that. I think some of the things that are definitely going on at the moment are very real and we should see. So we have seen a reduction in young children in our borough. I think that's partly about the impact of Brexit. I think it's partly about the impact of the pandemic. I think it's partly about the impact of the benefit system that doesn't allow people in our borough to have enough to live off their private renters particularly. I think those things combined have clearly had a big impact on the number of young children, the number of young children coming to our schools. We're going to have to adjust to that, and that's going to be a difficult adjustment for us, I think. In terms of the economy, then what's clearly going on at the moment is the industry is talking about at the moment about flight to quality. So big commercial organisations are looking for really high low carbon standard offices with really high wellbeing standards. Now that does mean we have to work out where there are office blocks in the building that are not new but old and perhaps not going to be so desirable. What's the future for them? I feel more reassured about that now than I did perhaps a year ago, because I think who's been really hit hard is the other side of the river and the central areas. Our rent's been slightly lower, I'm holding this up a bit, but it's a risk for sure. I think in terms of the broader picture, I think people have genuinely seen the benefit of living in a local community. Everyone's found other reasons, it's what most people like about where they live, but people have seen that even more. And so the importance of making sure our neighbourhoods have the things people need in them, and that mix, and that's everything from your leisure facilities to your great quality green spaces, to the high street, that's got the mix of things that you want to have on it. So making sure that we're really focused on making our individual neighbourhoods work for people so they can do the things they want to do in their neighbourhood, whether that be working, leisure, etc. And then of course the other big shift that the pandemic has accelerated is the shift to online sales. And I think we're going to have to work really hard with our local businesses to understand how we best support those on the high street to thrive, and we change the taxation system so it doesn't just benefit the applicants of the world, but is much fairer, and that we do end up with thriving local economy. Then I think by mail is incredibly convenient for us all, but it's really bad for the environment, which has huge amounts of cardboard, huge amounts of vehicles moving around, whether they're petrol or electric, it doesn't not great. So those are big strategic things I think we do need to address. Sorry, you had a third question.
Yeah, what do you wish could have been delivered that hasn't been? It doesn't matter what the reason is why it hasn't been.
Pandemic. I think, as we know, the things that have been most difficult are about education for young people. And we've got great schools, 95% that are outstanding. That's a great place to be. But clearly for young people in the borough, they've had periods of not being in school, of disrupted education, disrupted exams. I think we've come through that pretty well in circumstances, but really helping those schools recover is really important, and that's continuing that progress, particularly reducing inequalities in education in our schools, is the thing And then what else has been hard? The remarkable thing, the things that feel like they should have become really difficult to do, like building council homes, just complex materials, actually we're managing to move on with. The challenge we face there is rising costs as much as anything else. We've seen construction industry costs go up by some 20–23%. These are big impacts.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Chamberlain next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Kieran. I remember the first meeting that we had as council during the pandemic, during the first lockdown. I said that I was really impressed by the way that the council acted swiftly, diligently, with care in lots of things that they've done. And one of the areas that I cited was about helping rough sleepers into a home. Now, I think actually that's referenced in there. I think that was incredibly commendable. But I did also say at that point that it was a golden opportunity. It's one that we couldn't afford not to lock in. And sadly, we have seen that we are now starting to see a rise again of people sleeping on the streets in our borough, and it's a really tragic thing that anyone in 2022 in a rich city like London, a rich country like the UK, still has to sleep on our streets. So I just wonder if you'd like to sort of comment on what more you think we need to be doing in the future to make sure that we are not forcing anyone to sleep on the streets, and where potentially did we not. Where did we fail to lock in those amazing things that the council did during the pandemic?
So at first point, I mean, absolutely, in a country like ours, no one should have to sleep on the street. It's where we should all start. And we should all be aligned on this. We've got a government that made a manifesto commitment for sleeping, and yet we've come through this pandemic having put in so much effort, and yet the government has not stood by us for anything beyond about the first 6 months of this process. And I suppose we face some very real barriers to being successful here. The achievement we had, over 300 people now, not just supported off the street, but supported off the street and into long-term homes since the pandemic started. That's an incredible number. And close to 500 people supported off the street now into their temporary population in the meantime. These are incredible numbers. But what are the real barriers we face to ending rough sleeping in this country? They're the hostile environment. They're the fact that many people on our streets are not able to claim support into getting a home. The government has set rules that make that not possible for many residents, for many people. And while some of those rules were in part, and it only ever was in part suspended by the government during the pandemic, they rapidly reintroduced them again. And so we still hit up against those. Now, we've worked very hard. We funded funds at the Law Centre to provide support to people who have no recourse to public funds. I always remind everyone on this when we talk about we've got no recourse to public funds. In many, many cases, they're people that have all of the eligibility to have access to public funds, but the Home Office hasn't yet issued them with the paperwork that they're fully entitled to. So we started to fund to do that work, and that's worked effectively. But we need that to happen. We need those rules which are denying people the most basic thing, the right to a roof over your head. It shouldn't matter what your history and how you ended up in London or any other bit of the world. That should be something that the government is denying you the right to. And then the last thing to say is, Southwark is not an island. We have worked incredibly hard to support people off our streets, but we can't do that on our own for the whole of London. We need London to be standing together. I'm very glad that many councils are working as hard as us, but not all are. And at the height of the pandemic, we had some councils that were effectively moving people out of their patch into other bits of the city. And we had some councils who were using the temporary accommodation that the GLA thankfully provided as a kind of stopgap, as a way to then not support those people longer term as well. And I think therefore we've ended up with a situation where support is, we Southwark can't solve London's housing crisis, but we've done way more than our share. We need a national government that resources long-term support for people. We need a national government that gets rid of the rules that stop people being able to access support. And And ultimately, stepping back from all of that, we need a society where people aren't being forced into poverty and destitution long before they end up on the street. The benefit system is fair, council housing at scale across the whole country, not just in Southwark, options for people that will allow them to have a decent life, investment in the NHS services around addiction and other things too that are essential to this as well.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. Jack, I didn't mean to say I had two questions. My second question is on
I thought you might.
why have one when you had two? So my second one was about again, welcoming experience in the plan, which is about the opening of the LGBT cultural space in Bankside. I saw you went to the centre yesterday, which is fantastic. It's been really warmly welcomed by the queer communities here in Southwark, by residents in Bankside. Really fantastic addition to our borough. And it's something that I'm really pleased to have played a part in. When my colleague David Noakes and me met with former head of planning and the cabinet member, we suggested that the memorandum of understanding with Bankside Yards was amended to make sure that this was put into the into planning. So I think it's fantastic that we're all working together to support the LGBTQ community in our borough, and long may that continue. And actually, really appropriate that it is there in Bankside, because the recent survey that we examined as a committee did show that Bankside is the part of Southwark where queer people feel most at home. The question is, given that we've had such a success with the current centre, is it possible to extend their tenancy so they can continue the good work that they're doing? Because it's only a pop-up at the moment, and actually, we don't need that space, but we could absolutely keep being able to do great work for the queer community. And secondly, as part of the memorandum of understanding, we did say that we were going to open up the marketing for the cultural space at Bankside Yards to members of the community and engage the people that live in Bankside. And I just wondered if you could give us a bit more of an update on where we're at with the marketing of the permanent space.
Firstly, it was fantastic to visit the other day, and it is absolutely wonderful to have a space for the LGBTQ+ community in our borough. It's a real success. I know it's been hugely valued by people in Southwark, but actually, going back to my point earlier, people across London, we are actually serving a much wider community with something that I think it has been really valued, and particularly that it's a space that's not based around alcohol, actually, and different kind of cultural space has been really, really important. So, as you say, the current centre is a pop-up. We are looking at whether we can make that pop-up last longer. I don't have full details on that, but we're definitely looking at what we can do. But obviously, the real plan is then to make sure we have a permanent home, and that's the one that we deliver through planning. We will be working with the LGBTQ+ community to look at both the specification for that, the marketing of it, getting it right, and making sure we have something that really works, and is led and run by the whole community.
And also the community in Bankside.
And also, look, yeah, absolutely.
When does that start?
I don't have the time, so I'll have to come back to you. But I think it's relatively soon.
Perhaps you could drop Councillor Shane in there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bernard, please.
Thanks very much, Kieran. And just reading through this, it's pretty incredible, kind of the list of achievements, and especially during a pandemic. I feel very proud to have served under this kind of Labour administration we've been done. And it's really good to be talking about kind of a 15-minute city, as it's called. So creating those kind of distinct neighbourhoods where everything is in short walking distance will go a long way to solving the climate crisis. My question to you is about the climate strategy and the housing strategy. Obviously, my thoughts are how can we reach that zero carbon target when we're building? Obviously, there's a massive need. There's over 16,000 people on the waiting list. People are seeing domestic violence. As you've just said, there are thousands of people homeless in the borough. But how do we ensure that we meet our targets, climate targets, and build at the same time? I just wanted to get your
It's a really good question. And I suppose the starting point always needs to be whilst making Southwark a net zero borough is one of the most important things we're doing. course, we can't do that at the cost of the dire situation that some people are currently, including the fact that 16,000 people on the waiting list for the council, and we must address that at the same time. So the things we're doing is making sure that the new council homes that we start building in the future are themselves net zero homes, and ramping up the standards for their carbon standards, and actually the broader environmental standards, actually making sure they also include biodiversity around them as well. That's going to be incredibly important. I think as part of that, we are going to have to learn with the rest of the world how to make residential buildings at high carbon standards. I think the commercial world has moved on at a real pace about how you produce low carbon buildings. For residential buildings, it's fundamentally covered by the planning system and by fire safety rules, which are likely, we need good high quality fire safety rules for residential properties, but they mean that some of the materials, particularly building timber, is much harder for any scale of residential building. But for me, the commitment is that we make sure that the homes that are building are at least net zero, and then looking at how to break this down.
Can I just have a really quick follow-up? And I think you're right, and because I was thinking about office spaces being turned into potential housing, obviously done with care and thought. And walking through the city bank, you see that there are so many empty buildings, but that's not really the case in Southwark. When I walk through Borough High Street, it's thriving, it's busy. But has there been any thoughts on have you seen an increase in empty office spaces, and would you look at potentially converting those into homes?
So that's about 5 questions. Which is very fine. In terms of empty office space,
yes.
At the moment, Southwark is doing quite well on occupancy rates for office space. We're not seeing big around here. It's full. People are struggling to find space, but across the borough, our office space is in reasonably high demand. It seems still at the moment. So there aren't lots of empty office spaces, and where you do see them, it's often because of that checks or something. On the principle of converting buildings, well, I think the principle of converting buildings is a very good one, and if a building is no longer very useful in its current form, converting it into something else is a better use of it. It is exactly what we should be doing, and we need to see many more conversions of buildings rather than rebuild it. As you implied in your question, I am deeply worried about the standard of some office to residential conversions. We've worked hard to prevent permitted development rights for that in the borough using Article 4 directions. Actually, right now, we've got the government saying we shouldn't be doing that. We should just be allowing permitted development. That's needs to change those Article 4 directions. But quality is what matters. If a building can be converted from office to home and done well, a safe building with a quality living experience, with good amenity space, with good room sizes, yes, we should be doing that. But we absolutely can't be doing it if it's a rabbit hutches with no amenity space. It's going to be a really poor place, poor quality place.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Babuda.
Thank you, Jeff. Really fantastic through this achievement. So I definitely echo Councillor Leonard's words there. I just have kind of one question really. This commission looked previously at the growing ethnic pay gap within the council. It's an excess of 14% at the moment. And kind of it was picked up in the Scrutiny chair. One of the kind of it's certainly somewhat within kind of members' briefs, but it's not pulled out essentially. And is this one that's of enough concern that it should be on your desk? And one of the things that sits with the leader, I'm thinking particularly about the ethnic pay gap over time, but potentially just pay gaps overall.
So anyway, it's certainly something I personally can't do about, and I think we should be having attention to. And on pay gaps overall, so it's worth saying that the gender pay gap in Southwark is it's essentially neutral, with women on average are paid slightly more than men. However, when you look at any of these gaps, the overall numbers don't tell you the whole story. And it's statutory back comparisons with the bits of the council, and you have to really work through any big organisation like ours to really understand where different inequalities are in different places in the organisation. But you know, back to your question on the ethnicity pay gap. So we set out a whole set of plans to reduce inequalities in our council on the back of our work around Southwark Stands Together and the workforce side of that. I think they all matter to close that gap, and we absolutely need to report, as we do every year, on progress. So our workforce plan, workforce statistical report, whatever the name of it is, sets out all these things in great detail, and we really increased it to make sure that it sets out ethnicity pay gap, but also all sorts of things, where people access training, disciplinaries, a whole range of indicators. But I don't think there's any one quick fix to them. The things we are doing are everything from reviewing, changing how appointments are done, so that we're making sure that we're getting rid of the inequalities at that point when we enter the council, reviewing disciplinary processes, so making sure that those don't fall unfairly on some groups of staff, as they do, sadly to say, making sure that training is accessible to all, making sure we've got really strong workforce representative groups for bits of our workforce. I could go on. I think each of them really matter, but of course the real test is to be happy I'm reassured we're doing the right things, but I do want to keep a really careful eye on that into the change that we want to do in terms of a closed gap.
Okay, I've got Councillor News.
Thank you. Thank you, Kieran. I'd just like to sort of thank you for all the incredible hard work that you've done in the time that you've been leader of the Outstanding specifically during the very difficult period of the pandemic. And it's really humbling actually to hear that Southwark Council has really stood out as one of the strongest in so many ways in the country during that period. The difficulty clearly that we have at the moment is that we have a government which has, during the past 12 years, cut our funding by, I think the average is around 64% in that period. And obviously, effectively, the same government is still there and will be for hopefully not too long, but nevertheless will be coming into the new municipal year. What are your projections? What do you expect funding to look like over the coming year? And do you have a strong, again, it would appear that because the government has made certain commitments in certain areas of the country, it seems often happy to ignore the levels of deprivation which clearly are present, sadly and disgracefully in our city. And how do you think that we will fare in any sort of future funding package that comes forward from the government?
Well, thank you. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think is the first thing to say. So, we've gone through this over a decade now of seeing our funding cut every year, government grant being cut back. That's clearly had profound impacts on the ability of the council to provide the services people that need. It's important to say that's one element of the changes we need, but of course we've had cuts to benefit systems as well, we've directly taken money out of our residents' pockets, and then we, the council, have had to step in to provide support for many of those residents like our community support fund. As we look forward, the things that make it uncertain, so the government's talking about, and has been talking for a while, that we've got to do a fair funding review. It's not clear what that would mean, or whether it would be in any sense fair. We expect another reset in business rates at some point, which would mean that the proportion of business rates that we get to keep might reduce. We are seeing this talk of levelling up nationally, which feels very much like levelling down to me. And include some of the big things that we relied on, the European Social Fund funding that we were receiving, replaced with the Shared Prosperity Fund, but what feels like a real risk for us that funding doesn't come to London in any meaningful way. Some of the really important things we did with that money, like making sure that everyone could get into employment and training has to work, the funding to do that work disappears, or the employment support work that we provided with that funding, the funding again for that disappears. So I hope that sense is finally seen by government nationally. Councils across the country, some, but many others have absolutely shown their strength during this pandemic. We've shown what we can deliver for communities. The government has said that austerity is over, but I fear that in reality we're going to see more difficult years of reduced funding and continued austerity for our community until we have change.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, actually, before I ask my question, Chair, I'm going to ask about recent decisions relating to the Inverton Road site on Ivydale School. So I should say for the record that my children attend that school, but because it's not pecuniary interest, as I understand it, and we're not a decision-making body, it's okay. Thank you for me to say that. So just
Your children are outside when it goes.
yeah, they were with Ivydale jumpers on, I noticed as well. Yeah, so Kieran, you know, we've spoken about the events that led up to that decision, the proposal to close the Inverton Road site, and the welcome decision to kind of reverse that proposal. And for whatever personal role you may have played in that second part of the equation, I am grateful, and I know lots of people in the local area, Nunhead and in Peckham, my ward, are very grateful for that as well. But there does remain the question of how we got to that point in the first place. And so my question is, can you give me a reassurance that you will ask for those matters to be looked into and take a personal interest as leader of the council in kind of looking at the circumstances that led to a proposal being made to close a school site that was only a few years old, a full school that remains full and will, you know, and remains very popular, and how we got to the point where that proposal was made, and basically the council needed to make to unmake that decision in the way that it did.
Well, yes, I'll definitely take a personal interest in finding out what exactly happened there. Indeed, we'll ask those questions you should expect. I think it's important to say that that there seems to be a complex set of things that happened, that being what was presented to parents. I don't think it was ever the council's intention to present a proposal that was about closing the new building. But I don't know the full details. I don't want to say more than that until I've done exactly what you asked me to do. But you know, I don't think that was where we were trying to get to. You know, it's also important to say, you know, the real challenge here, you know, the school has a substantial deficit, and I think what we were trying to do with the council, I know we're definitely trying to do with the council, is find a solution that worked through to help the school clear the deficit in a way that would work for the school, for the children of the school, for the local community. And that's something we still need to find straight to work together. And that's really, but to your question, absolutely, I already have looked into why it didn't work as well as it should.
Thank you, Kieran. I think Councillor Buck's got one. No. It was your moment. Okay, well, thank you, Kieran. You've answered all the members' questions this evening, so thanks again. And obviously, we know the weight of the world is on your shoulders, but we wish you well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now, without further ado, we've got Councillor Stephanie Pryor.
So, Chair, just could I request we have a 2 or 3 minute comfort break, just because we've been going for 90 minutes.
Yeah, it's just the Councillor Pryor. You sure?
Yes, 2 minutes.
Just 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Well, let's make it 5 so people don't have to. Okay, we can start the meeting, please. I welcome Councillor Stephanie Cry, Cabinet Member for Council Homelessness. We're going to touch on a number of issues that members have indicated that they'd like to have more discussion about: the delivery of new homes and state renewals, temporary accommodation, allocations, repairs, fire safety and planning, and such things. So, would you like to make a few remarks before we open up to the question?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
So, absolutely, and I think both of the things I expected to be asked for this week, when I made a list of what will I be asked today, those are absolutely on there. I think in new homes, we've got a really good story to tell. We are on target. We will hit our target of 2,500 new council homes either built or on site by May. So I think that has been a massive achievement to actually do that for homes that people need. So I think if you go from Kieran, Kieran's questions, it's actually 16,500 residents on our households on our waiting list, and we desperately need to build homes. So I'm really proud of the fact that we're actually there, we're achieving it, and actually delivering on our promises to build really good quality homes for the people that need them. In terms of TA, that is an ongoing pressure, and I know we touched on that at the budget cost meeting. It's the one part of my portfolio that's in the general fund that doesn't sit in the HRA. And again, there are 3,500 households in temporary accommodation. We are seeing people present. However, the number of presentations are starting to go down in that respect. But it's the ongoing cost pressures on that. It's getting harder and harder to find homes within Southwark or within London that sit within the local housing allowance rates, and the cost that we have to pay for those rents, and also you're competing with other London boroughs as well. You have to pay landlords fees, and then it's the cumulative effect of that is sort of increasing the cost of TA. We will always open the door to people who are homeless and help and support them with what we can. But we do need to look at how we contain our costs on that, and we have got a budget recovery room to look at how we can do that without sacrificing the service and the need that we provide there. In terms of allocations, there will be a new housing allocations policy coming to Cabinet in the autumn around September time. We went out to consultation on that last year. We're working through the results of that. I'm happy to answer any questions, but there will be a new allocations policy within that as well. And within that, we will be doing some certain things within that, which I'm actually going to be bringing as hopefully as an idea before pre-election period around changing our local lettings policy to up to 100%, so that more people in the local area can stay in their local area and access their support networks and stay within their community. And also changing that definition of deliberate overcrowding, because I think that absolutely needs to be changed as well. So those are two things I want to bring forward before we agree the full allocations process as well. So we're working on trying to get that through, but there'll be a whole new allocations policy. I think the last one was yours, Ian, when you were doing housing. It was the last time we did the housing allocations policy. So it is due a refresh in that respect. And I mean that in the nicest possible way around that. Repairs, I think repairs continue to sort of be, the that and house and sort of, housing allocations tend to be the two biggie things that I get in my inbox. And I actually welcome the fact that Gavin has given his housing scrutiny. We do have a regular review of the housing repairs improvement plan. It came to the last one. So we do have a repairs improvement plan. I think we put it into place and then COVID hit. And things had to stop because of COVID. We had to have safe working practices for our workers, but also for our residents, which meant we couldn't do a lot of the internal repairs around that. We are working through the backlog. I think the main backlog now, we've got about 300 cases in there, primarily either things where you have to spend a long time in someone's house, like the things like the plastering or the decorating. So the actual repairs being done, it's the making good bit, where, and again, because of COVID, because we're only just coming out of COVID, we do that, or community repairs. So those real urgent ones have been worked through within that backlog. But we do have a repairs improvement plan where we are working at. It's about having a whole new service where we put residents front and centre and having an end-to-end service. It will take time to work through. One of the main things we want to look at is having a dedicated repairs contact centre that sits in housing, not in customer services. So it actually sits in the housing department. So there's trained housing operatives who can help support that as well, because I think that would be a better experience. And actually residents can actually track their repair from start to finish, and no repair is signed off until a resident is happy to sign it off around that. And then in terms of fire safety, cladding, I mean, we don't have cladding on our own buildings, but I do have responsibility for cladding. So we've been liaising with DLUC, and we are actually recognised as best practice in terms of sort of the remedial with private landlords, either through enforcement or getting them to remove that cladding. So we are actually set that up. We sit with DLUC and we help them. You know, they've said that Southwark actually has probably one of the best programs around that. We're doing enforcement on it. We're working with some of the housing, though our remit isn't housing associations, we are also working with them to support them as well. I think the biggest issue in terms of building safety isn't going to come from cladding, it's the implications of the Building Safety Act that we're working through, where every single high-rise building has to have, we're doing a pilot survey of all our buildings to see what needs to be done with our buildings. To put that into context, Southwark has 170 high-rise buildings, so 11 metres or above, which is the highest number in England. It's more than Birmingham has. We have the highest number of high-rise. Birmingham has a similar number of properties, but we have more high-rise. So the impact of that, the financial impact on the HRA, is going to be massive because we don't know what we don't know. So at the moment, we're doing a pilot on Andover Cool in Peckham, and the reason we chose that is because it's quite a unique sort of layout. It's also a TMO, and we want to learn how we can liaise with our TMOs around things. And we're doing a pilot survey, which is not chargeable for leaseholders because we're doing a pilot. So we've been in the Dudson surveys of properties, residents have let us in, it's been great. But we're also doing something called BIM, which is a sort of 3D modelling of the building. So you get a whole model of that building, because under the Building Safety Act, we have to know not just about the structure and the fabric of that building, we also need to know about our residents in our buildings and who lives there, what their lifestyles are like, because actually sometimes the risk for a building is actually the people, and I don't really love it, but people live to, you have to have a whole picture of the building around it as well. And that's an intensive piece of work. It's going to roll out over 5 years, but we're going to be doing it for every single high-rise building. So we're factoring those in as well. And again, we're building the fire safety works within that as well. So there's a lot within those subjects alone to cover, as there always is with housing. But I think that's just a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things around that. So I hope that's helpful for members of the committee.
Thank you. That's interesting. We could talk all night. Okay, so I'm just going to throw it over to members. I've got Councillor Paul first, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Mr. Kami. Good to see you. I know that we have talked a lot about repairs, but it's about these repairs that I want to ask you a question. Concerning SBS, do you think that they are doing a good job? What do you tend to do about the thousands of jobs overdue because of the pandemic and of SBS way of working? And how are you going to go about it?
Thanks, that's really good and nice to see you as well, Maria. I think we're on a journey, aren't we? We've changed the brand from SBS to Southwark Repairs now because we bought it in-house. I think we're on a journey from when we bought it in-house a few years ago. So the first part of that journey was to actually make sure that we were working at bringing both the sort of SBS and what was Mears at the time into a direct labour organisation, which is absolutely the right thing to do, to bring it back into house. At that time, it sat that we're housing with a client, and it's with pleasure. We felt that actually that client sort of relationship didn't really work, so it's all back into housing. There was also the fact that we had to look at the terms and conditions of employees, to being over the terms and conditions of how we wanted the service to look and to run. So we spent some time with the unions negotiating those terms and conditions. I think, like everything, there are still vacancies that we need to do. We've recognised that we need more skilled trades, we need more sort of multi-skilled operatives as well. And the pandemic has had a massive impact on it, as I said in my initial thing around that. The repairs improvement plan does recognise that. We're looking at how we can take more apprentices and absolutely actively recruit apprentices. We want apprentices who we bring in and we grow and they stay with us and they learn the skills of the future around that as well. So we are on a journey, a journey that got broken up by COVID, and we're restarting it as well. In terms of the repairs that are backwards, we're now down to, as I said, about 300, 250, 300. Most of those are communal repairs. The ones that are in houses are more the ones where you need more intensive work and labour and sort of operatives in there for a long period of time. Some residents, quite right, still don't feel comfortable, and I absolutely understand this, don't feel comfortable letting people into their homes around the pandemic. So we have to work around residents and what they need as well. But we're absolutely committed to getting those repairs, that backlog down. And we're working through, and that is absolutely our priority. But at the same time, we can't just focus on the backlog and then not do the repairs that are coming in daily as well, because then that backlog grows and grows and grows. So it's that balance, so it's that balancing act on there. There are vacancies we still need to fill, and we are going out to recruitment on that. I want us to recruit more women operatives. I think our next batch of apprenticeships, we said we want to retain more women. We've only got 2 women who work in the service, but a lot of our residents, would like a woman operative to come to their home and do it. So I think there's a lot of things we're looking around equality and opportunities as well. It's a massive piece of work, and it's not perfect at the moment. And I hold my hands up and say it's not perfect, but we've got the recruitment plan we're working through and we come back to the cabinet every 6 months or so with an update on it. I'm challenged by my cabinet colleagues on it as well. It's a really hot topic. I think the work that Gavin's doing in his Scrutiny Commission really is really helpful, because it sets some really helpful recommendations which we're working through as well on it. But I just think this is one of those things that any OSC interview I come to, this will be on the agenda by definition of what it is. Thank you.
I have a few things. Yeah. My concern is that because, as you clearly said so, all the repairs are coming in every single day, so they are piling up. And I want to know, how are you proposing to get rid of all of those? Do you have a plan? Or?
We do. So we've got a backlog plan. We're working through it. So what we first did when we sort of restrictions eased off, we've been in touch with all our residents to say, do you still need this repair? Is it happening? So we could prioritise them and build it into the work streams of the daily work streams, as well as the ones that are coming in as well. So the first thing we did was we actually got in touch with everybody. For some people, for example, some people, it might be a leaky tap and they might have got a washer and fix it themselves. You just don't know. So we worked out, is the problem still there? Is it persisting? What's happening? So we could get a real good picture and then prioritise what needed to be done. And so the really, really urgent ones got done first. We worked through those, but we didn't ignore the new ones that are coming in. So it was planned in within the work days of our operatives as well.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Will you continue to build on green spaces despite the opposition of the residents?
We are, wherever we're building new homes, we look, and I think as Kieran said, we are looking to increase biodiversity. We have to build homes, Maria, and a lot of the spaces we're building on are pieces of land where people don't, you go to a TRA meeting and they'll go, oh, I have a bit of land there, people use it as a dog toilet, whatever. We want to enhance the biodiversity of our estates. And whenever we're doing a new homes project, we work with residents in the project group to look how we can do that, how we can make our estates greener. We have to make our estates green. Part of our Great Estates project is built in with that as well, to look at how we can make our spaces and our estates that are green. We actually either replace them and make them more biodiverse, or we look at how we can sort of build in more biodiversity within our new home schemes. We're absolutely committed to increasing biodiversity across the piece. But I think, we've also got to recognise that with 16,500 people on the waiting list, we have to build. We absolutely have to build, but we will not reduce green space. We will not. It may be in a different place on the estate. It will be more biodiverse, but we will not reduce the amount of green space on the estate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
And you, Tony.
Okay. Yeah, Maria's got to be.
Sorry.
I'm also sorry before I bring in other members. I very remiss of me. I should have indicated that we have the strategic director of housing on Zoom with us this evening, Michael Scorer. Can you hear us okay, Michael? Yes, good. Did you want to make any comments at all at this stage?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions, though, if there are any.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I've got Councillor Ali next, please.
Always comes in threes, sorry, and three slightly different topics. So one's around major works, TMOs and equality. One's around working across borders, as in the residents who live on the edges of the borough and the service they're getting. And then one is a more general question around the age of our housing stock, the fact that we have so much of it. Back in 2012, I think it was Peter John who said we're not selling it off, we're not doing anything with that. And yet we've got a climate emergency, and you're going to have to sink millions of pounds to try and get these up to standard. So the three questions are on major works, and I'm going to just cite something in my ward which you may have seen some recent emails on, and I've been trying to get Kieran, who doesn't want to read, which is around Devon Mansions, but it's representative of things that happen elsewhere. So, and since I've been in council, the quality of major works has been rubbish. We've had admissions from the council that they've, through their own incompetence, they have breached, what do you call it, when you get the warranty periods and things like that on roofs, and yet residents are being charged more and more and more to make up for that. So are we really in control of that? And in that particular example of Devon Mansions, we've, residents have won a tribunal case because the TMO have sort of not been doing what they're supposed to be doing at the time, so they're arguing that they don't want to recognise. So there's one thing around what's happening with that. Do you feel we're in control of that? Do you want me to ask one question?
Yeah. So I think there are two parts of that, Mara. The first is about major works itself, and I am aware of the issues that Devon mentioned, and we've got a new head of DES who actually is, we're looking at how we can look at improve that for you around it, and things, and it hasn't gone as it should at Devon Mansions, and I know that, and we are absolutely aware of that, and looking at what we can do to make that good.
Please, can we meet with you?
I'm happy to. No one's asked me, but I'm happy to meet. Yeah, absolutely. I think the other part though is the TMO, which is slightly different to the major works because the TMO is it can be difficult with something else. I think the issue we have is that TMO management and the TMO liaison doesn't sit in housing. It sits in environment and leisure. I personally think it's with resident engagement. I personally, my personal view is it should sit in housing. It's a housing function. It's a housing thing, and so. And Michael isn't responsible for it because it doesn't sit in housing, and it's really hard. So we've got it's more the sort of liaison, the sort of relationship with our TMOs is more of an resident engagement thing, and I think it needs to come back into housing because it's a housing issue, and we should have more of a housing. So I'm still pushing to try and get it moved into the housing department. So if we sit there and have a director or an assistant director or head of service for TMOs, we will get some of these issues that not just them that. And I'm not downing TMOs. I think TMOs do a really good job. I think tenant management organisations are really, we've got some great TMOs. Sometimes they struggle, and it's a struggling bit where I think you need the housing department to come in and give that experience and support around it. So I just want to say, I'm aware, this is one of the things I've noticed since, it's been just over a year now since I've come back into housing, and you pick things up and around it as well. I've met with some of the TMOs for the TMO committee, myself and Kieran, and we had a really good chat with them to look at what we could do. And we've picked up some ideas around, what we could do around supporting them, but also some learning from what they do as well. Because actually, I know you've had specific issues at Devon Mansions, but that's a lot of residents of TMOs, but there's a reason why they keep voting for continuation. Because they actually like being part of the TMO and what they do around that. And, you've got a really good TMO that covers part of your in Leather Market, JMB, who really show a really good example of self-financing and what they can do. And the satisfaction scores from a lot of TMO come up really, really good. And I think that, there's things we can learn from them as well. But I just think that it's that disconnect between it not being in housing and it should be in housing that just needs to be fixed. And I think if we can do that, we can start to get some progress on it. But absolutely happy to meet you about different matches. Just drop me an email. And I'm sure, Michael, you'd be happy to as well, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, always.
Yeah.
Just got foldable.
So, yeah.
The second question then, working across borders plus housing associations, I'm going to throw in there because they are the Wild West. So I've had a number of cases where we've got residents who live very close to the border with Lewisham, or border with Lambeth, maybe they're in an overcrowded home and they want to do a swap, or they want to find a way to look at the facilities. In one particular case, I've got a lady who's got children with special educational needs, so moving for her, which is in an overcrowded situation, is even harder because finding the right schools and so on and so forth. And yet, when we have the conversation with Ricky's team, for example, I know they're under immense pressure and they are doing a fantastic job. But actually, if you could, what is the plan around perhaps working a bit more cross-border around the whole sort of swaps and lettings piece? Because I think that could potentially ease up quite a number of issues as well. Otherwise, people in Southwark, right on the border, are still looking back to Southwark for potentially there's not things there. And the point about the housing associations is they are the Wild West. Standards are really, really patchy. And are you looking to put some sort of arrangement? I think they've done something like that in Lambeth, where you at least get some sort of consistent standards.
So coming back to the first bit, obviously I represent the ward, which is right on the borders, so I do have this issue. I think the issue is that if you're going to do it across borders, it has to go down London. You have to get all the local authorities, but you can't, because every local authority borders another local authority around that, and that's a really hard thing to do. We've got Pan London for emergency placements and for people who have to sleep to gang violence or domestic abuse. We've got Pan London reciprocal process, which Southwark has signed up to and been signed up to for a very long time on that. There's not been any appetite, unfortunately, and I've asked my colleagues across London in the past about this. There's not much of an appetite around it. However, one of the things that I'm looking to do, and I think Gavin will remember this from our speed dating, not that Gavin the right speed dating. How we can facilitate a holistic approach to finding homes for people. And obviously building new homes is part of it, part of the allocations progress is part of it, but actually we underutilise mutual exchanges, local mutual exchanges around it. And it's about how can we get smarter at mutual exchanges, how can we introduce each other estates. So, for example, now you might have a 2-bedroom, I might have a 3-bedroom, I might need a 2-bedroom, you might need a 3-bedroom, we don't know each other, but how can we introduce each other to each other so we can do that? So this is a piece of work that we're looking at. There's technology we have to buy, we're buying that technology and we can start to, I want to have a holistic process in terms of how do the options people have to move up around it. So there is, again, it's a work in progress, but it's the ball started on this and Scrutiny Commission wait for their recommendations on it, but I'm sure we will pick them all up around it as well. But I think it's quite exciting actually. I'm really excited about it. So I'm looking at the project, I'm really excited about it. Something to make a big difference actually.
Yeah. And then the last question.
Housing associations, yeah. I'm happy to look at that actually. I mean, we work really close with the housing associations and the homelessness forum. So they're part of the homelessness forum. I introduced homelessness forum, but I meet every once a quarter. We've got some partner agencies and housing associations very much a part of that. And not the last one, but the one before that, we had an absolute spotlight on the housing associations themselves for them to present to us what they are doing in terms of preventing homelessness amongst their tenants and the work around that. I think we could extend that out to a wider piece around that because we've got the connections there as well. So that's quite an interesting idea.
And then the last question was about your ageing housing stock and the fact that, well, is the plan still the same plan or is that plan starting to change?
So we've got, with 55,000, we've got various stock. We've got stock, the housing stock that was built at the beginning of the last century and to the ones we're building now and every decade in between. And I think the thing is that the issues you find with different properties are different varying on the age. So for example, if you've got the pre-war and the interwar homes, you find that there's more issues with dampness and mold because of the cavity wall insulation. Newer homes, there are, you might find 70s type buildings, you find leaks and that because of the prefabricated concrete, so there's different things. But we are absolutely committed to all of our housing stock, absolutely committed to ensuring that they are. We need to, as part of our major works, but also as part of our fire safety and building safety, we need to understand, we need to make sure they are up to standard and we are committed to that programme. So we are still committed to all our housing stock around that. Yeah. The questions are we going to keep our housing stock? Absolutely.
Yeah, it was more about just a wider plan. I appreciate taking much time.
Yeah.
Accommodate.
But I think the other thing we've got to look at, it's tackling the climate emergencies. It's about how do we make those homes greener. And some of the things we need to look at is retrofitting, and we are going to have to retrofit a lot of our homes into that. And it could be things from cavity wall insulation to make them safe, a lot more energy efficient, to wider works that we need to do. We've made a commitment to decarbonise all of our district heating systems. We've allocated 350 million into the housing investment programme to ensure we both modernise and decarbonise over a period of time our district heating systems. We've got 17,000 homes connected to district heating. So whether it be that we, we've got some air source heat pump projects that we've had grant funding for at Windsor Estate, Cotswold Estate and Newington Estate, which are coming online now around that. So that actually decarbonises those. We're hoping that cell chip will be extended down to the Old Kent Road in Peckham and Camberwell. So again, there's the capacity to link more homes onto cell chips. So there's work that we're doing and we're programming in around making homes greener. And as part of making homes greener, we've got to make sure that every home is as green as possible. Around that, we're looking at how we can put, we're applying for funding for double glazed windows for all our street properties, because as well, we tend to, when we talk about housing, talk about our estates, but we've got a lot of street properties as well. And again, we've got, like I said, we've got Victorian stock as well, in that respect. So every type of stock is a different type of solution. We need to look at the solutions that we need for each one. We are committed to doing that, absolutely.
Half our stock was inherited GLC.
It was, yeah. And that's problematic in itself because you don't have a record for it.
Well, and Mrs. Thatcher never gave us a penny to go with it.
Yeah.
So that completely great, but on councils. Fine. Right, Councillor Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So just one question. It was one that I didn't get around to asking when we were talking about repairs.
What were all the feedback?
Let's not talk about sleep. And I'd be interested in your view and Michael's view on this. Obviously, the reason behind the recommendation that we put in the delivery of it, of the service coming back and ending that client model, was that when we were talking to senior managers, kind of through no fault of their own, because they were talking about it, there was a kind of strange disassociation between them and the service that the council itself that they worked for was delivering. And it felt like, through no fault of their own, they weren't taking ownership and responsibility for it in the way that you would expect senior managers to do so. So my question is, now that we're moving to a different model, are you starting to see senior managers, but other managers as well, taking that responsibility and ownership in the way that they weren't before? Are we getting the premium from the change?
I think we are starting to see it. We actually have different we've had a new head of asset management since then, who absolutely wants to drive forward those changes in that. I think it is a journey. I think some of it is the change in the mindset and the culture. There was a cultural change that's needed. We are seeing that starting to come through as well. I think you're right, that client sort of, it's a contract-client relationship type thing, was very much about that relationship, not about residents.
Yeah.
And so, I have regular meetings with the sort of union reps as well, because it's really important that I hear from them about what they're like, and they're absolutely committed to having their, to put residents at the heart of what they do as well. We are starting to see it come through. There is a culture shift that needs to be done. It does take a while to get done, but I'm confident that we will get there.
I don't know if Michael wanted to say about that question, Chair.
Thanks very much. I mean, I agree with Councillor Cryan. We're going in the right direction. What I would say is that, well, two things really. One is that the move of what was then called Southwark SBS into housing and modernisation didn't happen until April 2020, which was shortly after we'd gone into the first lockdown. It wasn't the best time, unfortunately, to make the big change around that client contractor split, which was definitely there. However, we have done that. I think that the way in which managers now see the service is certainly different, but I would say that there is a very heavily ingrained culture which goes right through the service and is still there, that somehow there is a difference between what's happening in the depot and what's happening in Tooley Street, for example. So we're working really hard to bridge that gap. We've got some new management that's working with the repair service, making sure that that whole management line structure is now much more streamlined and simplified. And the repairs improvement plan that's been talked about that we have, unfortunately, was definitely put back in timelines because of, no doubt, absolutely because of the COVID restrictions. But that is a plan that everybody now is working around, and I feel much more confident that that's the case through the whole of that asset management division. And so I think I would ideally like to have been about a year further forward than we are. And I put that down to 2 years of pandemic, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. The culture thing is always the hardest nut to crack. And I think that's taking a bit longer, but we are moving there as well.
Move on then. Thank you to Councillor Hughes.
No, I don't. Thanks. I was going to get you something similar to Maria's question about the transfers, but I think that's something that it would be great to look into how that can work. I've talked to you about a particular case in one of yours in the past, but I think that's something we can do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Steph. 4 years ago, the administration committed to turning around council voids within 28 days. Since then, council voids have actually increased 50%, and in 10 years, they've increased 170% in our borough. So what's going wrong? Why are we not turning around council voids? Why are 1 in 8 empty council homes in London now here?
So I'd love to answer you, because it's not in my portfolio, it's in Council Merrill's. I'm not responsible for empty homes on the list. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
Why is it council homes homelessness is not in your book? Okay.
It's because it's part of the whole home strategy. I'm sorry.
All right, that's fine. Seemed odd, but I'll ask.
I did let Everton know that he wasn't in one.
As well. You would think empty council homes from the council. No, fair enough. Okay, my other question then, I actually got 2 more, so I'll use the opportunity to ask both. So Southwark set up its own construction company, which is fantastic. That's one of the ways we can actually get motoring as a borough and actually, deliver affordable housing. So since 2010, how many of the social homes that have been agreed in Southwark have been delivered by private developers, and how many have been delivered by Southwark Construction?
So we only agreed some construction in January, so I think that you've got your answer there. So it came to cabinet. So we were looking at what is the best way to do it, and the reason why it only came to cabinet, James, was we were looking potentially, and I think it's really important to explain why, we were potentially looking at doing a joint venture around, because we don't have obviously the tools, the people to do those jobs from day one. So we were looking at a joint venture. The more we looked into it, the more we felt that in terms of things like if we signed up with a delivery partner for a decade, our values around getting social value around jobs, the apprenticeships and that, that may not align with their values over time. And for me, that was really, really important. For me, the social value is so important around how we get the social value for our communities, how we get a good, strong local economy, how we get jobs for local people. And I was a bit concerned with a 50-50 split. You might get, and also using people for other jobs, not Southwark jobs. So we started to look through it. We felt that actually a joint venture isn't the right option around it. So we started to look at what can we do. So then we sat down, myself and Councillor Algeri looked at this and thought, we've got a really good opportunity here to start the construction with the training side, to get people into jobs and apprenticeships and start building and training development so that we can get our own class of works architects in the future around that. The other issue around a joint venture is that any developer partner would want an open book, which meant that we would have to hand over jobs and we could have a potential period of a year or 18 months with no building development. And again, that's not acceptable for me when we've got, we've got a desperate need for new homes around that. So what we've got now is we've got some construction, which we've just started, and it's around getting the skills developed on that. And as that builds, we will start building out the homes and using those levers within that. We're setting out a 5-year business plan for some construction as well. It's very much in its very early stages. So yes, we had hoped we'd do it, but I think this way is a better way than tying yourself to a developer or a partner for 10 years, where we absolutely, this way we can absolutely get that social value that we need and deliver that we need around that. So I actually think the way was worth it in this case.
I don't disagree with anything. That's not actually answering the question. I think, I work for a council and housing development. I think this is the right approach.
I think the answer is, I did answer that because we've only just started, the answer is.
So then how many or what percentage of the social homes have been developed in the last, in the last 10 years have been developed by private developers?
They've all been done, haven't they? We go out to procurement on every contract.
So 100%.
Well, we've had to because we haven't had the construction company to do it.
And then, my second question is about cladding and our relationship with HAs, because as Mara said, often they're the Wild West, which is a great phrase, but they're the people that are actually holding up so many people in our borough, hundreds of thousands of residents in our borough, forcing them to live in unsafe buildings because a lot of the cladding buildings are owned by HAs, big developers. So can you outline how many meetings you specifically had with housing associations to actually challenge them directly on remediating the work in the building safety work in there?
So in terms of building safety, the way the government and the ministry set it out was that councils have to have responsibility for councils that may have cladding and private developers, and we're not really, and the housing associations have their own route which they report into. So our remit isn't for housing associations. The government haven't given us that remit. They've given it just for our own, which we don't have, and private developers. However, we have been working closely with Hyde because obviously I think Mara, you made about the Salmon Centre and the issues there.
Hyde have got half of Bermondsey Spa. And and what they've been doing there. So we've been working with the ministry with Hyde to get them to pull their stock out and their wallet out to help support a youth club that if they are at risk because they own the freehold of a building that Hyde built around that. However, we do work and talk and support housing associations where possible, and we will lend our help and expertise to them, and we will do that. And I think Michael covered that. Again, Des and Simon, who are responsible for the bit about cladding thing, do have those conversations. The enforcement team, which sits in the licensing sector team, also are working on it as well. I absolutely agree. I think they do need to do more. They do. The people who live in these homes, it's not their fault that the cladding's there. In terms of leaseholders, they absolutely shouldn't pay. And I think the thing that's really worrying me now is the new when Michael Gove announced about who pays for the building safety. Absolutely right that leaseholders should do it, but there is an indirect consequence of this, that if housing associations and local authorities are paying, they will take that out of their tenants' rents as well. We've got a possibility now that tenants might be paying for remedial works as well, and they're blamed this as well. So I do think there's some flaws in it.
other intermarket vote that it actually gives some reassurance. You haven't got back to me yet. I will. So, but around it. So absolutely, we will always talk to housing associations. They do come to us. We do give advice with it, but we don't have responsibility. But the government have given us responsibility, as do the private landlords. But there's a different route to housing associations. The government liaises directly with them.
But you could refuse to work with those housing associations until they're remediated.
And then who builds the homes for the 16,500? You can't pit. See, I understand what you're saying, but you can't pit the sort of the cladding scandal with the need to build social housing for 16,500 people, because we do that. The vast majority of social housing we do, we're reliant on housing associations. We say to housing associations, we won't work with you. Our housing list will get longer. Our waiting list will get longer. We won't be building the social housing with it. And then we're hitting the needs of people on the housing list against the needs of leaseholders as people who need that remediation. That's an unfair battle. That's an absolutely unfair battle. We need to tackle the cladding issue, but not at the expense of not building social housing. And we can do that.
I think Michael wants to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought that the committee might be interested to know that I chair a cross-sector fire safety group that is attended by the Borough Commander from the LFB. It covers private sector as well as council and RSL Housing Association accommodation right across the borough. Actually, at the moment, all of the housing association property is either has had its cladding removed or is in the process of having that done and being finalised. I think it's probably all just about finished now. It's not quite true in the private sector, but we are very much continuously in touch with major landlords, including in the private sector. I would just say that my worry extends well beyond cladding. Fire stopping is and other material that's on the outside of buildings are both serious issues, and we work closely with all sectors on that and our colleagues across the council. The last thing I thought that the committee would be interested in is I regularly meet with the LFB Borough Commander and with the lead LFB person for the three local boroughs which deal with enforcement. We've just agreed that they will let us see the information that they have about all of the buildings in the borough. So it will enable us and them to make sure we've got the same view, which hasn't been the case. I don't think, and I'm pretty certain it's not the case in almost any borough. So we're really forging ahead in a I think what will be an amazingly helpful way with the information that we share on exactly what's on the buildings and inside the buildings to keep people safe.
I would meet the Borough Commander. There's a dialogue there. So.
Good, thank you. I've got Councillor Gabood next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for your responses there. It was just your response on council properties and fire safety. I just wanted to double check. Are there is the take that there's no council properties with cladding or significant compartmentalisation use? Because I was looking back. These things are so fast moving.
Yeah.
And last time we had a Borough Commander, which was quite a while ago, he flagged like 16 council properties.
So cladding, no, we've got a little tiny bit of ACM cladding on the Dean House, which is a low-rise building and an open deck access, but that is being removed around it. Fire is different to cladding because that's around it. And we absolutely do have, obviously we've got Ledbury Estate where we've got the structural, obviously, but we've got a really good news story about Ledbury because we've just got a planning application going in and a real great resident design for the new plans. We've got Marie Curie House, which is the one in Castle Winfield's ward, where actually we've got we are having to do remedial work. So that But so this is a block on So Gardens Estate in Council Winfield's ward. We had a resident who said they thought this is prior to me coming into the role, but we had a resident who said they thought they could smell incense burning from a neighbour's flat, and so we checked the compartmentation and the work there. We found that actually there was safety works that needed to be done. So what there's internal and external. So what we're in at the moment, we've got a wake and watch there, so that there is, so that if there were, God forbid, a fire, that people are notified and they can watch on that. And we are at the moment, unfortunately we do have to empty the block to be able to do the internal works. The external works we can do with residents in situ, but the internals we do. And it's the reason we have to, it's not the sort of complexity of the work, it's the complexity of the building, because it's something called a scissor block. So you've got like scissor blocks, you have a living room there, and a bedroom there, and a living room and a bedroom there, and they sort of scissor over around it. And you have to get under the floorboards to do things, to get fire stopping works done as well. So we're in the process of working with residents on So Gardens to rehouse them. Everybody will be given, they're all 2-bedroom homes, so we're assessing their housing need around that, and we've had 41 of the residents now moving out. For any leaseholders, because there will be some leaseholder charges and want a leaseholder buyback, we're doing those around that. And once everybody is out of the block, we can carry on doing it. We can do the external 12 people still live there. Once we get over that block, we will redo those. Everybody's got the right return. Some people may not want to around that as well. But I think the ward councils are kept updated regularly on this. We've got a really good relationship with the TRA there. We've got teams, dedicated officers on the ground there, and an independent residents friend who helps support Project Group there as well. So that's the biggest one we've got. I think the issue is when we do the building safety surveys, pilot surveys on the big blocks, you can never say never. And what you, as I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know that the pilot surveys we will know. And it would be very naive to say that nothing comes out of it. It would be so naive to do it when you've got 170 blocks around it. So I think, doing these pilot surveys and those implications, it's going to be very costly and have an impact on the HRA. It's absolutely the right thing to do, because resident safety is paramount. It's the most important thing around it. So I think I come back to what you said, it's important to differentiate cladding and fires and safety. They are two different, they are different things. Yeah.
Okay, just on Marie Curie, as you raised that, I just want to publicly say how appreciative I am of Mike Tyrrell and his team. They've done exceptional work down there. Council is very, obviously very appreciative of everything they've done and continue to do. Thank you. I've got Councillor back.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Steph and Michael. Just coming to a part of the brief that we haven't really discussed so far this evening, which is district heating networks. And I've been thinking about all the work that we've done on district heating networks in the last 4 years, and it is extensive. So I'm not going to labour the point. But one of the things that I've been thinking about quite carefully, and it would be good to get your sense on, Stephen and Michael, is the effect that the energy crisis might have on our residents who are using district heating networks. Because obviously we've seen the cost of fuel absolutely spike in the last few months. So I was wondering if I could get an idea from you both about how severe we think the impact the energy price rises is going to have on tenants' rent or service charge contributions, and what the council are going to do about that. The second point was a more general point around district heating network performance. I know a lot of investment has been put in, and we've had a scrutiny report on this. There have still been performance issues across the borough's networks since then. So just if you could maybe talk us through lessons that have been learned on performance and what standards residents can expect in the next council term. And one final brief point, and it may be a simple yes or no, but as we've spoken a lot about SBS and the housing repairs coming in-house, have we considered doing the same for district heating repairs, and would we ever consider doing that?
So the first part of that, we set the district heating rents rates in the service charges in the HRA budget. We set it at 4.1% line with rent. So in terms of service charges, that part of their service charge it increased by 4.1%, CPI plus 1% in September, so we can say in line with what the rent increases were. So hopefully that will protect. So it's a fixed percentage. Yeah, and it won't go, and we will be looking at it obviously in the next HRA budget. So I think residents, you know, although prices are going up, there is a cap that is 4.1%. So on that part of it. In terms of the actual cost of the fuel, we have a contract with the laser contract where we buy fuel in bulk at a cheaper price as well. So there is economies of scale. It will go up. So that's it's part of the E&L side because it's part of all of that fuel, not just the housing fuel, but all of that side. It will go up, but we still can drive the cost lower than it would be if we went through that bulk procurement process. It's through laser, which is through Kent County Council's procurement, through lots of local authorities use it. So actually that pooled investment means that you can you get it for a cheaper price. I do worry that you know, we know that yeah. So tenants, I think, you know, tenants are capped at that 4.1%. It's leaseholders actually, who, because they pay their share of the costs around it. And I think that's why it's so important that we've sort of set up the energy fuel support fund. So that if any residents are struggling with their fuel bills or low incomes or struggling with fuels, we've got that energy support fund that we can refer people to look at what help and support we can give towards that as well, around it. But I think we didn't want to set it higher than 4.1%. So we're recouping the cost of some of that fuel to our residents ourselves. So it's coming out the HRA around that. So we're offset because we acknowledge that, you know, fuel costs are going up for everybody around that, and some of those residents on the lowest incomes, it's going to be really hard for. So I hope that sort of reassures you on that one. In terms of the networks themselves, so I said earlier, we've set aside £350 million in the housing revenue, in the housing investment programme for district heat systems. I think what used to happen at some point in the past, we did our PPMs, the plan preventive maintenance, didn't look at all this, and what we're finding in some of our states, to put in context, we've got 142 district heat systems, and the vast majority of them run fine, and there are a handful of them that are consistently problematic. We've identified the top 20 that we need to work through within the next 4 years to get that. So there's funding there to work through those top 20 to do those repairs. I think some of the examples, I'll give you some examples. I'm not going to name the states, but I'll give you examples of the things that are happening. So, for example, we've got somewhere, you know, we've put new boiler rooms in, and that it's working great, but actually the pipe work underground to the flats, you know, like a sieve. So it doesn't matter how great or efficient it is, the more water you put in, it's leaking out, and so therefore you get very, very faint heating or partial heating into flats. Things like that. So it's the ongoing plan maintenance. It's about the treatment that you know, corrosion of pipes, those types of things around it. We know where they are. We know we've got that money, you know, we've now got that investment in it, and those more problematic estates, we're doing it. On top of that, we're also looking at what grant funding is available. Green grant funding is available to enable us to do more, to install more ground source heat pumps on the estates. As I said, we've got 3 estates at the moment, and we want to do that so there's less reliance on the boiler houses as well. There's a massive sort of climate emergency, energy efficiency, green energy efficiency there as well. But absolutely, and then just having the boilers as a backup or a booster backup around that. So we have got a plan. We've got a whole heat network strategy which we agreed in July, and which goes through absolutely everything we want to do within the next decade to try and do it. It doesn't need to be investment, but we've put a lot of money aside to do that around it. But I just do want to stress that yes, when our district heating systems go down, it's awful for the people who live there, because if you haven't got any heating hot water, it's awful. The longer it lasts, the worse it is. But the vast majority of our systems are working and providing that heating. We just need to make sure those ones that do need the work have worked and are upgraded, and they're the first on the list to be upgraded. And then I forgot the last yes or no one.
It was in housing. Just a very short comment rather than a question. Just before I let you do the in-housing one. Just on the price rises, it's good to hear that that's capped for tenants, and I think those of us who have constituents who are on large district heating networks will really appreciate that. What I would say is that obviously there is no guarantee that the geopolitical trends that are driving up prices are going to be resolved by September. So if we are looking ahead to that, I think early communication to tenants about any potential rises is super important, and particularly in those estates that have low incomes. So just a word from the committee that if we could have a plan to look at those in advance and be having those conversations with TNRAs and tenants as early as possible, if we do think the prices will go up, I know that tenants and residents will really appreciate that in their financial planning. And yeah, the final question I had was, have we ever considered, or would we ever consider in-housing the district heating repair or contract?
I will also say, but come back on what you said. Yeah, in the HRO we did say we would really look at what the situation is in summer anyway around heating, just to give you a bit of an extra insurance at. I did ask you, we have looked at this actually, and my view is never say never. I think at the moment because the difference with SBS was we already had the SBS although it is in housing, well, it was part of Southwark Council's own sort of repair service, and we just got rid of the client contract and management part of it and brought it all in-house with the subcontract. We don't have that with district heating, so it would be a standing start. So we would have to look at what is needed, what the skills, what the expertise, who do we need to recruit in, because we had workforce there for that. So it would take a longer period of time around that. It's something I think we can look at, but I just don't know how, and I've spoken to Michael about this before, haven't I? I said to you, can we bring it in-house? But I think it would need a lot of work and a lot of consideration to get there. Michael, did you want to come in on that, about the sort of complexities of it? Because I said we don't have anyone employed by the council who would do it at the moment, but I'm all for bringing things in if we can, in-house if we can.
I mean, my answer is not at the moment, if we were to do it at all, because we're absolutely stretched in terms of managing, and I think we need to get the repair service much better than it is. It's going in the right direction. We've had that discussion already, but I think that would be, it would in all likelihood stretch management, stretch resources, and slow down that improvement in that area. So it would, I think we're not ready for it, but always it's something that we can go back to and have a look at as things improve elsewhere.
No, I mean, all I would say is that the councillor who has an estate with lots of complex issues, the problem that you're going to start to have with an in-house repair service, outsourced contracts for different parts of it, is how they work together, and that's quite disjointed a lot of the time. So, it's good that we're keeping it on the table. Is all I would say. And then I'll be quiet.
Thank you very much. You want to come back in?
Yes, sorry, thank you. So my thought process has been running over this whole fuel issue, and I don't have any experience directly of in my ward, as far as I'm aware, of district heating systems. I'm conscious that obviously we have Selchip, saying 1,700 homes are from Selchip.
No, 1,600 homes on district heating.
Yeah, right. So and how many of those?
It's about 2,000, 2,500 Selchip. So at the moment, Selchip, so Selchip is obviously based in Lewisham actually, but just by the sort of area. So we've managed to extend Selchip into Rhode Island and parts of Bermondsey. So that was the first part of it. We have a contract with Veolia and the terms of agreement with Veolia to do that. To extend it, we need, because it isn't, it's owned by Veolia, it's not owned by the council. Veolia need to fund this. So they've applied for funding to extend it. They've actually been successful in some of the funding. They've got two different ways they can fund it. They're board trying to decide which one to be best for them. The funding they've got, we're hoping will help start the network to support it through the Old Kent Road and into Camberwell and into Peckham. It has to be incremental because we think we can get probably up to about another 3,000 onto Selchip through that extension.
So thank you. So what I was actually going to ask is, so I'm conscious, obviously, all our rising fuel bills now that's all because of oil prices, and Selchip is burning rubbish, which obviously one would expect would not be something that they had hedged at any point in terms of their energy supply. So is it fair to assume that our contract with Selchip is a flat price which does not vary according to world energy prices? And I mean, yeah, all the other. I mean, one of the reasons the energy companies, obviously, a lot of them have gone is because they were greedy and didn't hedge their supply and the price went up. I'm assuming that Selchip. I'll be really interested if. I mean, that is a question I would really like to know about whether Selchip is hedged in any way at all, and if not, one would assume that they have to have a flat price for energy. In which case, if we are buying energy from Selchip, and perhaps that also is the case with any other renewable heating systems that are run from renewable energy, I am assuming that our entire price structure as a council must be very different from that in homes which are running on fossil fuels, which are subject to world price. And it'd be really interesting to find out more about that. And it might be something that you can't sort of.
I can't, and the reason that is because it's Veolia which has the contracts with the environment department around it. Michael might know. In terms of the pricing, we don't base the district heating price on whether you're linked to Selchip or not. It's a flat price across all our tenants, and it's pulled around that. So we don't differentiate, say you're on Selchip, so you pay this amount, and you're not on Selchip, so you pay. Well, it's a flat service charge fee for district heating in general, and the HRA. I really don't know what the contract that E&L has with Veolia around it. Michael, do you? I'm going to ask you, Michael, because I really don't know the answer to this.
I don't know the detail. I mean, I think the key point about Selchip is that the way that the heat energy is delivered doesn't require it to go through a national grid, and so green energy sources that go through the national grid still end up being subject to massive price rises that are related to fossil fuels because everything gets mixed in together. We've got separate piping which takes hot water, so it will remain separate and therefore only links to the price that Veolia charges that springs from their own operations. At the moment, they've got excess energy, so they're producing more heat energy that's just being wasted than is currently being used, for example, to heat homes. So, I think there wouldn't be. I can't see that they would have a case for putting their prices up. All I would say is that I do know that the cost of putting in the original infrastructure, the maintenance of that, the running of the operation, and then the expansion, obviously all requires to be paid for. And we have been successful in co-bidding for money for that to happen, and that those discussions on exactly how that happens are still ongoing with Veolia. But I'm afraid I don't know the details of exactly how they construct their charges.
Can I ask one quick question as well? Sorry, well, that's not so quick. In terms of, and it's not, again, it's something I've raised before. I was actually going to raise it with Helen, and I thought, no, I've talked about it before. So obviously, we're in a situation where we've set aside a pool of money which is there to help people potentially with unprecedented and unexpected rises in fuel costs. At the same time, we've got and it's a problem perhaps much more in the private sector than in our own council stock, but I'm sure in our own council stock as well. There is obviously a problem with heat saving, and whilst retrofitting inevitably is quite a long and inevitably very expensive process, which we equally do need to be tackling. But is there something to be said, and do we do this? Do we have somebody, or do we have officers who can, or people who can go into homes and make some really obvious
kind of quick fix recommendations to tenants, as well as, you know, perhaps it would be something that we could offer to the private sector as well, when people are in fuel poverty, where we can say, you know, if you put a bit of draft exclusion on that window, that's going to save you a lot of heat. Is that a service that we provide in any way, and is it a service that we could provide in any way, just on the basis of that kind of, you know, sort of, let's say, not actually retrofitting, because I appreciate that's something which is dealt with in a different pocket, but just having somebody go around and make those sorts of recommendations.
We don't, and I think one of the issues we have is that at the moment we are only going back to visiting. We've not visited homes for so long because of the pandemic as well. I mean, one of the things which isn't this, but just wanted to let you know, Mike, is that we are working with an energy company called Forefront to carry out energy surveys of Leicester to see how energy efficient they are. And we found about 700 properties which could benefit from insulation, roof insulation, or double glazing and things like that. So we're working through both to improve that energy efficiency ways that people, as well as we are looking at how we can do it. But I think it's an interesting thing. I'll take that away and have a look at whether we could or not and what that would look like.
I mean, I just think it's like draft exclusions.
Yeah.
So draft exclusion is not something that you're going to get in your insulation
No,
of your roof.
exactly.
But it could actually still make a massive.
No, it could. But I just thought it would be worth saying that
We've
we've had that thermal imaging done at Leicester, and we've identified the ones where we would benefit from it as well.
Thank you, Chair.
No problem. I think you've exhausted all the members' questions. I think so. So thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you
for coming
everyone
on
as
tonight.
well.
And yes, so keep heating the house.
I'll try. I'll build them first.
Well, yes, absolutely. Great. Thanks again for your
Thanks so much, everyone.
Cheers. Good night. Now, we could take a 5-minute break, or we could go straight on to the next slide. Let's go final.
Power on, it's getting late.
Evidence is going to distribute another couple of recommendations. Okay. Right. Okay, so we've got 3 separate papers. There's a 6-page document with recommendations. There's a 2-page document and a single page.
Okay, do you think it's document? I only have the text and the new 2. Where's the other one?
Which one have you got?
The 2-page document.
Council Chairman. Yes.
Oh no, I have that one. You said there was 3 though.
2 paragraphs. No?
Yeah.
And this one. What haven't I got? Oh yeah, no, I have that one. Sorry, I'm being sick. Sorry.
Yeah.
Ignore it.
Yeah,
ignore
I
me,
think
ignore
I
me.
must have it.
You mean this one is the report itself?
Oh, yeah, but I
Yeah.
have got that. Sorry. That one.
Is that one?
Yeah, got that one. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay. You already got another report done? Good. Now, just looking at the longer page, like the 6-page and the 2-page one, I think there's a certain amount of overlap, if I put it that way. What I'd like to do is sort of merge them if we can. So, looking at the 2-page document. Yeah. So the first thing there, it mentions about multiple organisations. Now, if we look on the 6-page document, on the 4th page, specifically you'll see point Roman numeral 2 increase the level of affordable housing, which is a specific target. So I'm not sure your recommendation is more general rather than specific. Isn't it?
Although
So
I'd be supportive of amending this to include a 50% affordable housing target.
okay. So if we merge the two to include that.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's reviewing and with an aim to 50%.
Yeah, I think that's basically what everyone was telling us, wasn't it?
Yes,
Not
yeah.
building of council homes, so 50% would be the appropriate number.
Just to talk on that point, I mean, it's important to remember that the Mayor of London's figure is 50% affordable housing, but it has no provision for social housing required within that. And the reason why Southwark's overall affordable housing quota is lower is because we require a percentage of that proportionally council homes or at social rents.
Yes.
My concern with the proposal in the document to raise it to 50% is if we're not, that we need to specify that any increase in brackets affordable housing includes the maintenance of that requirement for social housing.
Yes. Okay.
That's not clear in this.
Okay. Sorry, I thought that was implicit, but I completely agree with Jack that I think it should be 50% social housing.
Okay. Yeah. Can we add that in? Yeah. You want to write it for everything?
Well, it's not mine. It's
No. I mean, what you just we just got to put brackets at the end. What did you say? In line with the council's current.
Yeah. Well, I think this is also out of date because haven't we increased our affordable housing to 40% as well already? It's not 35%, it's 40%.
I know, but the trouble is, that's report slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. You got. I mean, the trouble is because it's been that's what 18 months.
Yeah.
Some of this will be slightly. When we reference what people's statements when they first came to the committee, obviously there'll be a historic. Yeah. So we're happy then with that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Great. So the next one you've got here, the Bankside. Again, if we look at recommendation 1 on the first page, on the fifth page. No, sorry. Yes, the first page. You'll see Roman numeral 2 again. It specifically says the 9 protected characteristics and reducing inequalities. So again, it's included within that. If that's under consultation.
Say that again.
Where are we?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the second recommendation on here, which is to do with protected characteristics of representation. And if you look at the main document, the first page, under 1, Roman numeral 2, it says there the need of given needs of locality in terms of the 9 protected characteristics in reducing inequalities. Yes, needs. So again, it's an overlap in what you're saying. Yes.
I think, Chair, if I may.
Yes.
We could just add in to Roman numeral 2 on the main.
Yes.
That specifically needs to include consultation. Because it doesn't mention consultation, does it?
Well, the bullet point 1, it's all about reviewing consultation procedures, so it falls under consultation. All those Roman numerals refer to consultation.
Okay.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
I do. I haven't seen this before.
No, well, so do we leave it as it is? I come from the 6th page document. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Good. Right. So let's move on to your third recommendation. Is more the role of the process. So again, if we look at the first page of the main document, and then the two Roman numerals 3 and 4, you see I referred to as is referred to by the people we interviewed, the community consultative consultation framework that Lambert has, and the initiatives such as the local planning study in Camberwell, which enables all these groups to get together and to have an influence on master plans, etc. And then creating these ongoing consultative forums. So I think that covers your.
Well, perhaps we could have that, this third bullet as the header to those two additional points.
Well, I mean, it all comes under consultation, as I say. So,
devolution doesn't necessarily just mean consultation, it's something a bit more co-design.
It is there's a, I think you're right, there is a difference between consultation and devolution, but it's important, but I think perhaps for different reasons that you're suggesting, which is that if the council, it's a democratically elected body, wants to make strategic policy decisions about the implementation and the social impact of regeneration, then that power should continue to sit ultimately with the council. Consultation should happen, and those views should be taken into account, but the decision making should not be devolved to that level. Otherwise, those wider strategic decisions can't be made.
And your paper says consultation, it's under consultation policy. So
Yeah,
I'm not
I think they are going, basically the two points.
exactly. And we're not looking at devolving constitution.
Well, no, but I think that's what the
We're
recommendation.
talking specifically about consultation on regeneration scheme. This is something broader. You're after something broader which doesn't fall within the remit. I wouldn't agree.
But that's the recommendation from based on what we heard.
Well, let's have a look. So you're saying page 25, the SC5 forward. Where they say
What the SC5 forum was referencing about the fact that there isn't enough decision making being done.
yes, which I've included in the, I've referenced it at Lambeth Council. That's just what they referenced here in their document.
Yes, so our recommendation based on that, because we're extrapolating based on.
Yeah, but I'm saying I've already included it in this recommendation on paper,
Well,
so
is
there's no need to duplicate.
I'm not sure we're quite saying the same thing.
Well, you show me where it says that in the SC5, but it doesn't say that.
Can we come back to this section?
Yeah, well, you haven't read it, so you don't know it.
I've read it.
Well, you just said before you hadn't read it.
Okay.
Well, read it now and tell me where it says that.
I've just seen this evening. This is actually why I said at the last meeting, maybe we shouldn't have had this approach. We're literally trying to do the very last hour of minutes.
You've had a week. You've had a week, and you've only submitted this. When was it today? Yes, exactly. So don't.
So the approach was actually, is not finding enough sufficient time to do.
Well, the fact is, if you didn't eat up a lot of the time of meetings, then we would have more time to actually.
Well, that's your.
Well, making statements rather than asking questions.
That's your opinion.
Tonight. That's not my opinion. It's fact. It's recorded. It's recorded. It's recorded.
I think we're trying to come together at this point, aren't we?
Yes, and I'm saying there's no need for that duplication to duplicate it.
I prefer to keep recommendations.
Well, okay. All those in favour? Yeah. Right, all those against? You. So on to the next one. Okay. So housing repairs now, yes. So if we look at point 4 here, number 3, so if we go to the 4th page, heading 4, strategic council, and you'll see under Roman numeral 3, embody the core principles of recycling and reuse. So we already refer to that there. Yes?
So, Chair, where are we now?
Well,
Page
well, I was
4,
worried about this, but
the fourth page,
So we're looking.
Page number 4.
number 4, Roman numeral.
sorry.
And we're looking on. Yeah, well, I do too. Yeah, if you want to be here all night, be here all night. But I'd like to finish off. If you don't mind. Okay, so on this two-page document, we're looking at the penultimate one from the bottom. We recommend the council investigate how to reuse to regenerate council estates better. And I'm just saying that under 4 Roman numeral 3, we do refer to core principles of recycling and use there. Yeah. Now, what you've added on there is the disrepair issues. Yes.
Yes.
So we can add that sentence to the sentence here under Roman numeral 3. Yes.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. I agree. Thank you. Now, moving on to the final one here on the bottom of this two-page document. There's reference there to green spaces. Now you say Pepper and Vision on page 30. Make reference to protecting green spaces on site. I can't see that reference.
I think it was in the evidence. Isn't it?
Well, I can't, well, not on the page reference, it's referenced here.
It says page 30.
I know, I can't
I'm
find
on
it.
page 30. I think.
Can I just make the point as well, Chair? The council does have a policy of protecting green spaces,
I know.
and that there are official designations for these. That is existing council policy. So with that in mind, I don't feel that we need a recommendation in the report that asks the cabinet to have the policy it already has.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to take it to a vote again?
Yeah, sure. Okay, those in favour of it? Okay, those against? And then finally, this final recommendation over the page on County Code, on this two-page document, it says, Council return to us an update on the status of empty homes and to the state for generating purposes. Now you referred to 35% page 8. Again, I can't see that reference in the 35%. So if we go to page 8 of the report, I can't see anything there about empty homes. No,
Yeah, well, that's why we put the recommendation based on the evidence we heard. It's not.
but they didn't give that. They never mentioned it.
Which is why we're looking at how we can address the waste to bring empty homes back to use.
Yeah.
I mean, but why is there a specific reference on the table to page 8? Presumably there's something on page 8 that prompted that. Where is that?
So I can't find it.
No.
Yes, the evidence for the 35% campaign.
But what is it on page 8 though?
I apologise. Yeah, I will. No, I don't think it's appropriate to railroad to make a decision to put it as part of the court. So we will have to take time. Let's vote on it.
Well, we'll do a vote.
You want?
Okay, all those in favour of this?
I don't think it's a very democratic way to be running.
Well,
I have to be honest.
It's quite.
Yes, it is. So all those in favour?
So I'm dyslexic, so please give me the benefit of the doubt that it takes me a few minutes to actually read longer than you do. So
Well, if it helps if you read your own document to attend the
Right, I apologise at the bottom, because I was on the-
So this is the second page, the second page.
Chair.
Yeah.
May I just quickly to come on this recommendation? I mean, the council only has one estate that is decanted for
Well, that's
regeneration purposes at the moment, which is the Aylesbury estate. And the council has already brought 100 homes that were empty on the Aylesbury estate back into use for temporary accommodation in the last 18 months. And the only remaining empty homes on that estate are homes that are not fit for human habitation and are due for demolition. So this isn't an area where the council is lacking, and the action that the recommendation is making is action that the cabinet, working with all colleagues and local stakeholders, have already taken.
Yes.
So that's not to say, obviously, members are welcome to move a recommendation if they wish, but that's just an assurance from my perspective as the ward councillor for that area that action is already happening.
Absolutely.
As much as it can happen.
Absolutely.
And Chair, I'd add, based exactly on what Jack's just said, it's not good practice for scrutiny to make recommendations on things that we've pretty much got the evidence happening anyway. I mean, we want to be taken seriously by cabinet. We don't want them to just think we're doing that anyway and chuck it over the shop.
I think, it refers to the Haygate, the camp, which I think is actually, it's all about history. But surely we should learn from history.
We have. And that's why our policy is that different now.
Okay, well, let's move to a vote. I think it's clear the way it's going.
Yeah. All those in favour? Those against? Okay.
Chair, can I ask, because I'm conscious in the last 2 points, the recommendations which have been, so I think it's true to say that everybody here agrees with the sense of what is being said here. And the reason we've voted to make adding those recommendations is because they're already happening.
Yes.
And can I make it, I think maybe that we should sort of note and make it clear that the reason we are not putting forward these recommendations is because they are already happening and not because the sense of them has been rejected. I think that should be specifically made clear in any record of this meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think I'd like to say that because I don't think that was actually the case.
I quite have a point to raise this. Why is it that when Liberal Democrats ask for things that are to be noted, it's denied, but when Labour members ask for things to be noted, it's accepted?
Oh,
And I've seen this in a number of committees.
That's not true.
It's true.
Well,
It feels a shame that this whole report, this whole year of work had to be into this at the end of us. That it's had this aerial, and we have time to actually go through this in a way that we could have resolved these issues if it hadn't been done in this environment in this way. It's not democratic. It's not actually about getting the best sort of or learning best.
All right. Get off your soapbox. Yeah. Yes. I know. Right. Let's get. It's done with that. Let's go on to the 2-page one. The 1-page one. So the first one. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so these cover slightly broader issues rather than specifics. The first one is talking specifically to the issue that was made up through much of the testimony, which is the difficulty in regeneration schemes delivering a public good in partnership agreements. And I think this is something that the council have already learned from, is that we have taken actions over the last 10 years to enter into regeneration partnership agreements out of necessity. And now that the council's financing arrangements have been changed, we are no longer taking that priority, and it's obviously already in the council plan to not pursue that. But I don't think it's clear in the constitution on the decision making that we should put in place a condition that in-house regeneration of any estates that do need programmes is always delivered as the first option. And so the first recommendation is requesting that the cabinet make that amendment to the constitution, and that if the cabinet deems a programme of in-house estate regeneration in the future where it is necessary isn't possible, that a report must be drawn up to explain why, and that report must go through the council's overview and scrutiny functions. So we're just establishing a political precedent, or we're asking the cabinet to establish a political precedent, which is that in-house programmes are always the priority, the first priority, and then a process for scrutiny over any decision that divulges from that.
Just a quick question. In my argument for the ordinance, changes to the constitution, are they not made by full council assembly rather
Yes.
than cabinet?
Yes, Chair, full council assembly must change the constitution.
And we can't make recommendations to full council, to councillors, full council.
So
Can we make a recommendation to cabinet to make the recommendation?
who moves those recommendations to change the constitution? The Labour group or the cabinet?
The cabinet can make recommendations to change the
But
constitution.
my additional question, Jack, which might help, is that, so you, in your recommendation, you said amendment to the constitution. So is it really a change in the constitution that would lead to this change in what's essentially policy? This is a request to change policy, which the cabinet does have control over. So could this not be reworded to remove the reference to an amendment to the constitution? Which I'm not totally sure would be necessary in order for that change of policy to happen. And just to recommend that the council therefore change the policy in the way that you set it out. Is it necessary to change the constitution to achieve what you want to achieve?
I mean, I guess the only response that I would say to that is that changing the constitution makes it more concrete, and changing the constitution can only happen in those once a year meetings, or is it once every 4 year meetings? You're nodding your head, Norman.
Now, the constitution can be changed by any council assembly.
Any council assembly
except the council tax assessing it.
Okay, but how many times has that happened in the last?
But we very rarely change the constitution. The last time was the climate emergency. Before that, I think it was at least 2 years.
So I mean that's why I've gone down that route, because I think it sets in stone the priority and the process in a more concrete way, in a way that isn't more usually amended out. If there is a strong consensus amongst members that that isn't the right approach, I'm happy to withdraw it if that's what it takes to get the general recommendation through. But
I think Gavin's right. I mean, I think it's housing policy. Existing housing policy is in the council's constitution.
No.
So effectively, Gavin says it's the cabinet that can influence that policy and set that policy. So therefore, it should be directed to the cabinet rather than being an amendment to the constitution. I think that would fit better with the council.
I think the bit at the start that would give me comfort that you've already got in there, Jack, is that the cabinet will consider. And I think because I don't know what they are, but it's always with these wide ranging things. It's always, there are other practical considerations that maybe we're not cited on right now as we have this discussion. I can't think what they are. So I think it's sensible to ask the cabinet to consider this change. I think that's and probably leave it as that. Then if you took out the bits about amendments to the constitution, then that'd be okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarification question, Jack? So you've said a not in partnership with private or third sector organisations. So I get the Labour Party version to the private sector. But what is it about when you say working in partnership?
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell me a bit more about that? Because sometimes there are skills that exist elsewhere which actually can enhance what you're delivering. So why?
It's to do with the funding models. So lots of the community evidence came in saying that regeneration programs historically haven't delivered for constituents because the metrics aren't there. We're replacing estate programs with 100% social housing. We're getting with 35%, 50% is social. The reason for that is because the funding arrangements aren't there to replace like for like, whereas programs which are developed by the council are by nature as close to 100% as possible because it's funded publicly, not cross-subsidised.
Okay, so that's a really valid point, but the way this is worded, it feels like you're saying we'll deliver it in house and we just won't have any assistance or help from anybody else. And so just to be clear, us potentially doing the council out and taking specific expertise on things from elsewhere. That's how it reads to me.
This is what this is my only thought, because I'm not an expert in massive housing regeneration projects.
Yeah.
But none of us are, let's be honest. And so I'm wondering whether or not there might be specific areas of expertise where you would, for an element of a programme, you would need to bring someone in because you simply don't have it within the council. And because we had a change, change in policy, we wouldn't be able to do that. I know the thrust of what Jack's getting. You know, but I'm wondering whether or not there's a practical reason why it wouldn't be wise to put in place a blanket kind of capacity. I don't know.
Sorry, can I just finish part of my sentence though? But I think there's some specific wording that talks about accountability, financing, I don't know, I kind of just need to chew on it for a little bit about what right wording is, because your points are absolutely valid, but you just don't want to stop anyone from taking the expertise where it's needed, because otherwise you'll end up costing the council fortune.
I mean, we already have these programs though, right? We already have the council house building program that's delivered in-house, you know, and they bring contractors in. I mean, it's not saying that the council should not contract. It's saying that regeneration programs should be delivered by the council, not in partnership agreements.
So I think maybe this is around the definition of the word deliver. So I think what you're saying is deliver is who's accountable for delivering it. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that it should be actually delivered by the council as council.
As in every person who does, like, whether design, build.
No, of course not, because we don't have those skills, and that's not how we deliver council housing now. So, yeah, you know,
Sorry, I'm not an expert on this.
And it's not, you know, these things are not opaque. It's not like we said in-house, so everything must be in-house. I mean, the council has a mechanism to deliver its council house building programme as is. I'm not suggesting that's changed. I'm just suggesting that the Cabinet consider its first preferred option for estate regeneration programmes is always to re-deliver those as council.
Council controlled. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not necessarily council. You know, like say the design, every element of it. You're not suggesting that every element of that would necessarily be done by directly employed council staff.
No, that's not.
Jack, would it help if you put a full stop at the deliver such a programme in-house, full stop, and then delete the rest of that sentence? Because if so, fact, that's what you're saying anyway in the first preference. You know, you don't have to state the second or third preference. Yeah, it's the preferred option that you'd like to get over.
I might want to think about rephrasing in-house then. Oh, if we're going to do that, because I mean, there is a point here about being explicit of what has happened in this borough in the past, and that is what saying "and not in partnership with private or third sector organisations" does. If we're not going to include that, I would probably want to rephrase in-house to deliver such a programme as council homes or as local authority homes or something like that.
Okay, so in-house as local authority homes,
but not having. So the second bit,
yeah.
Shifting it. So you're shifting the essence to the outcome, which
Yeah.
is the
Yes.
rather
Did you
than
say
the method.
all as one?
Yeah. So it would read that the Cabinet consider. Oh gosh, I've got to take this out. The Cabinet consider stating that in the instance of any council estate regeneration in the future, the first preferred option in all circumstances be to deliver such a programme as local authority homes, full stop. Delete the rest of that sentence. Leave the rest as is. Yeah, people happy with that?
Yeah, that's great. Is everybody happy with that? Good, okay. Move on to the second one.
Yeah, so this is, again, it's kind of touching more broadly on the community evidence that we received, that some of, and this is kind of touching on a slightly different areas. This isn't on council estate programmes, but this is on the council's, this is looking more specifically at the council's opportunity area policies. So it's touching on that divide that I've tried to highlight in this large piece of work between estate regeneration and growth policies. And I think what the information that we don't have or that hasn't been done is a cost benefit analysis of these programs. And by that, I mean, one of the things that we haven't considered, and it sounds kind of stupid, but it's true, Southwark is a limited geographical space, and we only have so many plots of potentially of land that have potential to be developed. And one of the routes that the council has gone down to tackle the housing crisis at speed is to set up opportunity areas for private sector development. One of the outcomes of that is that private sector development delivers less social homes because the funding model, as we've already said, isn't there for high levels or 100% social homes building programs. And what I want the council to understand is what has happened with these opportunity areas, how many social homes will be delivered across all the different opportunity areas that exist, have been delivered or will be delivered, and what could have happened if the council had had a programme of buying that land and developing council housing plots over a longer period of time. So the recommendation specifically is asking for a cost benefit analysis to take place that evaluates that policy, the opportunity area policies, and looks specifically at the comparison between large private sector opportunity projects being delivered and longer term, slower but local authority driven projects being delivered as council homes.
I think what Jack just said, if you wrote down what you just said, would be a much clearer and better explanation. Did anyone? Yeah. I was listening from the start of what you said to the end of it, and that is a much clearer explanation because now I understand what you mean, but I don't get that from this. So it's recorded. It is recorded, so I don't.
Yeah, we could make your last comments. Yeah, sorry.
Just a quick question then. So they'll generate a cost benefit analysis, but is there also a recommendation to do something with that cost benefit analysis? I mean, I appreciate you don't know what it's going to say.
Yeah.
But you know, they can say, well, we've done it, just put it on the shelf now. So is there any sort of just follow-on action once they've done that? Do they need to bring something back here or?
Well, we could add a line that says that piece of work should be brought back through the scrutiny function when it's completed.
Yeah, let's do that.
We could include that on the 4 here on the main box. There's a reference to cost benefit analysis. Yeah. 4. Are you happy with that? Yeah. Good. So we agree everything?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Great. Oh,
Unity.
thank you very much. Final item is the work programme. Obviously, we have the 12 programme. I think it's to note, and then obviously whoever here left campaign, they can have the pleasure of overview and scrutiny for the next 12. So thank you all once again. Sorry for not being where it is the addition.
Can we just put a record of thank you to you, Chair, for caring over the years?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yes. The other thing